Welcome, everybody, to episode 6 of the Monitor Keeping Podcast. I'm Alan Stevens, along with Kai, who's here, and a guest today, Ryan McVeigh. Hi, Ryan. How you doing? Good. We're going to get into some good topics. We hope you guys enjoy, but first, we also want to make sure we hit on a few things. Thank you to Eric Burke over there at NPR. For all the support, being part of the network. Again, you can check out their website. It's MoreliaPythonRadio.com. They have multiple podcasts now under the umbrella. There's lots of info there, guys. Just about anything you want to get into, they're covering. So go ahead and take a look. Check out their shop. Check out the Patreon if you want to sign up and give some support. Help us get more information out to you guys. So with that being said, all right, let's get into it.
All right. So today's episode is going to really be us talking with Ryan about UV and all of our experiences back and forth, just kind of really getting as many things as we can on the table about the subject of using ultraviolet rays or using UV within your enclosure, and just a UV period. And then also we'll have a segment, since a lot of us are keeping Indo species, or all three of us are keeping Indo species, and so we should have a great episode today. All right, you guys. Well, thanks, Ryan, for coming on, man. We really appreciate you.
Dude, thanks for having me. I was excited to see you guys do this, and I feel bad because I still haven't listened to one, but I will, I swear. But no, it's cool to see somebody finally just focus on monitors, and me and Eric are just Varanid nuts. So.
Yeah. I've done a few podcasts monitor related with my work with stuff, and I kind of get a drift on how to do the podcast. More of a guest though, and just getting along doing this has been pretty exciting so far. Me and Alan and under NPR and stuff. I mean, those guys just hey, thank you guys for all of this.
Yeah, good dudes over there.
Yeah.
Now as far as I guess getting right into the whole thing, I just want to let everybody know that there's I guess debatable topic on this one, where usage of UV and not usage of UV is used by everybody. As far as breeding and raising up and being able to have success, I've seen people do it on both sides, or where there's kind of, I guess, always people always saying that you should use it and you shouldn't use it, and I would say that I use it on most of my enclosures. I try to use it on most of my females, definitely. But I've had some hiccups where animals I wasn't using UV on, they weren't bouncing back really well after courting and breeding and stuff. And after laying eggs, they just took forever to bounce back until I put them outside in the sun.
And I can tell you why that is too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. But with Alan, he's like, hey, you want to talk about UV? And I'm like, oh, you want me to get on my soapbox and just complain for an hour? Totally. So UV became this huge subject for me because it didn't make sense to me why we talk about whether an animal needs it or not at all, because they live outside. There's UV.
And they're a diurnal animal. Yeah, they're a diurnal sun-chasing lizard.
Yeah, and so they do use it. And the other part of it too is UV lighting isn't just UVB, and that's the biggest thing everybody needs to know. It's not just UVB. There's way more going on in that spectrum that's affecting your animals other than just vitamin D3 synthesis. So it's a way bigger topic than that. And then the other part of it too, one part of the argument for not needing UV with varanids is, they get the D from whole prey items, things like that, and it's true, it's right. You can circumvent the UVB portion of it. You can't recreate UVA, and UVA is insanely important to how animals react with their environment, how they see. A lot of iguanas, so Cyclura, iguana, Tenosaura, all of those guys have dual cones in their eyes. They can see the UVA spectrum. We can't. They can. It makes a huge difference on how they see their surroundings, how they view their food, things like that. It's massively different than how we see it. And it also affects a lot of other things like serotonin development in their brains. I did a study with Amazon tree boas and using UV, which super crepuscular nocturnal snake. Snakes don't need UV. And just the UV, the animals with UV and the animals without, I had 6 babies in each set. And I had one side with UV, one side without. And the ones with, all of them did fine. They were all healthy. But the ones that had UV, that didn't have UV, were very typical of an Amazon in captivity. They kind of hid in the back corner. They didn't perch a lot. They did, but not hanging out in the trees like you'd expect them. And they were aggressive, but I kind of had to go in and like wake them up and like, hey, food. And then they'd strike, and then they were crazy like always. The ones with UV were always perched up, were always watching me through the room. They were striking at me when I was 10 feet away. They noticed and watched me. And it was a very big difference on how they reacted and into their environment and stuff. And the way I tell people is what you're seeing is basically animals that you don't think need UVB, so you don't do it. You're taking away that UVA, which is basically causing seasonal depression. So you're lowering their serotonin development and a lot of the things that how they react in their environment. It also makes them, depending on the species, kind of colorblind. So they go from this rich environment to basically black and white with no sun. It's like living in Seattle. Like nobody wants to, they just go because Amazon's there. So
or like living in a closet, or like living in a dark closet, and then you're all of a sudden exposed to everything.
Right.
I was kind of getting to that before I think in a previous episode where, when I first started, I was just using a little floodlight in a big enclosure. So it was a little floodlight, and I was trying to have that ambient light spread to the rest of the enclosure. Really wasn't working. And then once I was lighting up my enclosures more, my animals would respond much better, a lot less like they were, trapped in a little closet,
Yeah.
And so, I feel like lighting up my enclosures, not just using fluorescent lighting and stuff like that, but actually just lighting it up, and having light from one side to the other without just having a little tiny corner that's lit.
Well, that's the thing. Like doing lighting, you do it in levels, just like they would have. Like you do branch across the top, basking platforms up here, super bright, full spectrum light, UV, your heat, and then underneath you've got high boxes and you've got layers and you've got different shades. And that's like when we talk about reptiles, we talk about heat gradients. There's light gradients, there's UV gradients. You need to provide a gradient in every aspect of their enclosure, humidity gradients, everything. Because in their natural habitat, they're going to be able to find variations, and you need to be able to do that and create those microclimates within every cage. But it's the same with lighting.
Yeah.
I love that because, talking about that, they can do that within the same tree. Say you got a tree that's 50 feet tall, a monitor could go from the bottom to the top and get all different levels of humidity, temperatures, depending on what side of the tree it's on and how it uses it throughout the day. So, I do think about those things sometimes. But for full disclosure, for the listeners out there, you've heard Ryan and Kai talk a little bit. I'm one of those guys that's super skeptical of UV. And actually, Ryan, the first time I reached out to you, I think I sent you a couple messages and said, "Hey, can I talk to you on the phone?"
Yeah.
And I put it out there and I said, "Hey, is this snake oil? Is this voodoo?" Because for the most part, I've been doing all right without UV in most of my cages for monitors.
I guess so.
To cover the other end of the spectrum for everybody out there, I could say in this group, I'm on that other side. Now, we did have a great talk. You led into a lot of things that I want you to share, of course, today with other people that's got my mind thinking about things differently too. But just to put that out there. So full disclosure for you folks.
Yeah, if I can get you to all of a sudden be like, oh, maybe I need lights, then we're good.
Yeah.
Like, I just gotta get everybody one at a time. I'm gonna get in your brain and make you go. Actually, how I used to think was stupid. Now that I think of it, and I'll get you.
I really felt like I tried like the solar glow from I forget the company, Exoterra maybe.
Yeah.
A couple of different other lines. The Power Sun, of course.
Yeah, all the mercury vapors. Yep.
Yeah, and then I have, I currently, and I still use it only because I used to be a chameleon guy as well, so I still use the linear fluorescent tubes, and that's just because they also cover more space than just the regular bulb, and I can see those bulbs when they're only dedicated to just 75 or even the higher watts. I don't even use those higher watts at all. So I will use 150 watts, but spread out in 3 bulbs, not just a 150 watt bulb. And so my usage on those bulbs doesn't really work for me unless it's just I'm using the 75 watts and I can really space them out, And so my usage now is after going through all of those, maybe what I think like 5 different brands of UV bulbs, compact bulbs as well, that people are just saying that are garbage. Now,
most of this stuff, nothing.
Right now, I'm hoping like all these bulbs we can kind of really discuss a little bit.
Yeah.
I actually haven't had a chance to go and buy myself a UV meter just yet. I've gone over it with Alan maybe a few months ago, and I was kind of just going through, just asking everybody that uses mercury vapor bulbs and stuff like that, and everybody just told me to go with the mega rays, and so that's what I ended up buying. And I have just the 75 watts though spread out between a couple enclosures and stuff like that, and I didn't even throw them in every cage because I didn't want to do that and have to just change them because I didn't like them all of a sudden, and then I'm going to change all 10, 15 cages. So I only use 2.
There's a couple things too. There's just to point out right off the beginning. One, this is something that most people don't realize, and where for all of us, because we do Indo species, everybody, when we start talking about temperatures, everybody's going to think we're idiots and don't know how to take care of monitors. Because every monitor species that you talk to anybody, 140 degree basking spot, you cook them, you give them and then you steep dirt and all this other stuff. And I'm like, dude, my spinulosis, if they get above 100 degrees, they waste away in like a week and die. They cannot get that hot. Yeah. And then when you talk to people, they're like, no, that's crazy. All monitors are that hot. I'm like, yeah, show me on Lesser Sunda Island or is somewhere in Indonesia where it hits 140 degrees ever.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
I don't really go above 125, 130 for surface temperatures. And the thing is that, okay, so here's where I've had to, give me 1 second. I'm about to hit my inhaler, so it's going to be funny, right?
We'll cover for you. La, la, la.
So I was keeping like Argus, Flavicrosses when I was younger, water monitors. Those guys are typically heat them and feed them, right? Like, our normal, pretty hot, all that, right? But once I got into the mangroves, keeping them anything that hot, Melanus or anything above where their ambient is above like 88, 92, that's their comfortable zone. Anything above that, they're going to be hidden away, right? Yep. And so what I had to do is I still have to apply the 120, 130, 135 surface temperature, but it's in a small space in the enclosure, right? I would say 25% or less of the actual enclosure is that little area. And then the rest of the enclosure has to be big enough to support 80 degrees. If it's too small, basically that other side is like 85, 90. It's going to basically get too hot rather than having an actual gradient. So my cages have had to be bigger. And so, those are where now using UVB for those larger enclosures and all that, getting it well lit and I'm actually just kind of bouncing back between many different usages of UV. Yeah.
So there's a lot of options. So let me go through these real quick, and I'll kind of break down the only bulbs in the market currently that have UV output. So if you start off with like the lowest, it's the standard incandescents that you see, like the day blue bulbs from Exoterra or the whatever day bulbs that have the neodymium coating. That is a thing. It does produce UVA. It's a way to produce UVA. That UVA is so small, it's almost negligible, but it technically has it. So any incandescent bulb that says it has UV, it doesn't. Any halogen bulb that says it has UV, it doesn't. They don't make UV. They don't hit those frequencies. You can't do it. So any of them that you see on Amazon that says it does it, they don't. Or it's that neodymium coating, and it's a very, very, very low UVA output. So when we're talking UVB, there's only 3 technologies currently on the market right now that produce UVB. There's fluorescent, there's metal halide, and there's mercury vapors. Fluorescent is my go-to. I'll get to it in a second on why, but fluorescent, what you're looking at is, what you said earlier about coils are all detrimental and people like tubes. Everybody that has an opinion on fluorescent lighting is wrong because they have no idea how it works at all. They just remember that a guy said something and somebody else said something is bad about UV, and then the regurgitation of that and the telephone game over time, and then now I had a girl tell me that coils will kill your animal and tubes are more like sunlight. They're actually the exact same thing, except one of them is heated and turned into a coil and then plugged into a bulb. And then the bulb, the difference between a tube and a coil, this is the only difference, is that it's the same materials, same phosphors inside, same electricity, same everything. The only difference is that the ballast that fires the fluorescent bulb is in the base of a coil, and it's inside the unit of a tube fixture. That's the only difference between the two.
So those bulbs work, right?
They work amazing. I almost solely use coils, and I'll tell you. So, might as well tell you why now. But the reason is I like tubes for the coverage. But there was a study that came out like 8 years ago that showed that chameleons could regulate their UV independent of heat, and monitors do the same thing. So that parietal eye or pineal eye that they have on the top of their head, that little tiny dot that you see in like monitors and iguanas and bearded dragons have it. There's actually an eyeball. It doesn't have a lens, but there's an eyeball in the top of their brain, and it like you can actually look at their brain and see this little eyeball on the top. And there's a hole in the top of their skull. That clear scale allows light to go down, and it's a subconscious eye. They don't actively see out of it. But what it does is it helps them to regulate their lighting. So they can regulate UV independent of heat. And if you think about it, even in nature, we were talking about the different variations of shade and things like that. But UV and the light is bouncing off every surface. So even if you're sitting under a tree completely shaded, if you take a UV meter with you, you're still going to have UV from bouncing off from all the different areas and filtering through. It's not going to be as high as if you step into the sunlight, but you're still going to have it. So they're able to get away from the heat and the sunlight and still absorb amounts of UVB. So if you have an animal that's like not doing well with its calcium phosphorus ratio, and it wants to bask more to get the UV, but if it has say it's a wild caught animal and you're bringing it in to get it situated, and you're getting it through that first like stage of clearing them out and getting them healthy and getting them hydrated, and it's going to have a parasite load. So if you get it really warm, that may negatively affect, it may cause its metabolism to go up. With these endospecies, absolutely. It cranks their metabolism and they waste away before they can get healthy. So if you do that happen. Yeah, so that's why I stopped using dual heat and UV, and I'll do it on one side for like the basking spot with a coil. So I do a heat light and then a coil in a silver dome. And what that does is it also gives you a better gradient. So with a tube, from where that tube is down, there's a gradient going away from it, and there's a gradient like front to back of the enclosure, but it's not that far generally unless it's like a 3-4 foot deep enclosure. But for most people, they're not going to see that, especially when you're talking tanks and smaller enclosures. So you're not going to see that depth. So the real gradient is from the bulb down, and that's it. Other than that, they can't get away from it unless you really make sure they have a lot of hides and stuff like that. And a lot of people just don't know that right off the bat. So you can stress those animals out by not being able to get away from it. With a coil, you provide a really intense UV right next to where the heat is, and then it's a completely three-dimensional gradient. As you go in any direction away from that coil, you're going to start to lessen the UV. And then I take another UV bulb and put it on the other side with no heat. So there's a big heat spot on each side, or a heat spot here, heavy UV on each side, and then in the middle there's varying gradients of UV in between with a lot of stuff they can hide and get away from it and regulate it. And they do that subconsciously, and that's why I ended up going to coils. Now, tubes aren't bad. Like, nobody should be like, oh, I'm never using a tube again. That's great. Just make sure you're providing those different shades and you're thinking about those gradients of how they can get away from it other than just up and down. Like, how can you start to create some more gradients? How can you shade more light? Things like that. Or even be able to get them up really close to it, where maybe it's on the other side away from the heat, if you're doing a tube. But that's why metal halide and mercury vapors, I kind of moved away from them completely, just because of that. It just locks you into that, where you can't give them that gradient unless they want heat, unless you do another bulb anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Nice. Now, as far as like space and with just on topic of the coil bulb, right?
Yeah.
Because it's, to be honest, it was my best option because of size and how I use bulbs, right? So I don't use anything much hotter than like 45 watt, 50 watt bulbs, and I use mostly BR 30s and BR 40s. Okay. I have a couple par 38s, but I currently now, because most of my stuff are pretty thin skin monitors, I really don't want any burning, and not all of my cages are really tall, right? They're like maybe 2.5, 3 feet tall. So, anything with crazy lumens and a really hot bulb isn't going to work for my setup, right? And so I would hopefully like to use those coil bulbs now that you mentioned, they're actually effective and everything like that. How far away should the basking spot be from those bulbs?
It depends on what you're going for. Like, to be honest, with most of the monitor species, especially the ones we're working with, you really wouldn't have to do much more than a tropical type series bulb at about 12 inches. That's good. Okay. I mean, if you want to go, if the basking spot's between 12 and 18 inches, then do like a desert series bulb, because that extra distance will basically bring that rating down to a tropical level.
Okay. All right. Now,
but most of them are 20 watts, so I mean, you take up a lot of energy, and you take off a lot of what your energy usage is, and they really don't put out much for heat. There's some heat in the ballast, obviously, just from the energy conversion, but it's not that much.
Okay. Now, some of my basking spots are like 6 to 8 inches away. Is that too close?
No, but I would definitely go down to the tropical one then. So I was starting to talk about UV and really breaking down and understanding what UV is. So UV light is ultraviolet, and what ultraviolet means is it's outside of the visible spectrum of lighting at the violet end, which is shorter wavelengths. Shorter wavelengths. Infrared is outside of the red spectrum, and that gets longer wavelengths. So UV light in reptiles and in animals, and just in there's a lot of different pieces to it, but the pieces we care about are UVA, UVB, and UVC. UVC is what gives you cancer and sunburns and sterilizes germs in hospitals. That it breaks down biological material. So that's bad. We don't want that on our animals. And that greatly affects the UV index as well. And I'll talk about that at the end of this, what the UV index versus UVB is. But we got to talk about this on why those matter and why they're different. But so the UVC we want to stay away from. UVB, most people know, is what reptiles synthesize vitamin D3 at. So UVC is wavelengths from 100 to 280 nanometers. They're short waves. UVB is 280 to 315, and reptiles synthesize vitamin D3 at 295, 296 nanometers at a peak. So we're creating bulbs that peak. We want them to peak their highest output of UV in that spot. And that because that's where our animals use it. If you were sterilizing something, you'd tweak the UV to peak in the UVC. And if you guys have ever seen like the happy lights, the internal lights for mood lighting, that's UVA. So UVA is 315 nanometers to 400 nanometers. So it's a little bit longer wavelength right before you get into the visible spectrum. You can actually we can see influences of UVA when you look at all of the different articles that have been coming out about reptiles being fluorescent. That's under basically a black light produces a lot of UVA and will cause that fluorescence in a wavelength that allows us to see it. The same thing with scorpions. When you put a black light on a scorpion, you're hitting it with UVA that reacts with a layer inside their exoskeleton and causes it to fluoresce. So you can kind of see interactions of UVA in that way, but UVA is also directly related to serotonin development in the brains of living animals, us included. So again, that's why seasonal depression is a thing, people staying inside, not getting as much direct UVA sunlight, or why you're happier on a sunny day than you are on a cloudy or rainy day. It's that's an instant direct reflection of how UVA influences your mindset and your emotions. It does that to animals too. And that to me is why, if we're talking about whether an animal needs UV or not, everybody focuses on whether they need UVB. We can supplement vitamin D3, and we can feed like our varanids whole prey where they get D3 from their prey, and they don't need, technically they can live, and we can supplement out the need for UVB. We cannot supplement UVA. We cannot do anything to supplement UVA. So the only way we can get UVA is by giving them these lights that have UVA. And all lights that are commercially available that produce UVB for reptiles also produce UVA. So that's why I tell people, like, even if you don't think your animal needs UVB, that's not the only thing this bulb gives off. And they do need UVC. And kind of that's what you were talking about with some of the females not bouncing back as well. That's immediately related to UVA. So UVA is really, really important for animals and how they see their environment and things like that. So when we're manufacturing a bulb, when it comes to fluorescent, what's inside is a mixture of phosphor powders that coat the inside of the glass. When you fire up a fluorescent tube, what you're doing is just hitting it with a ton of electricity, a massive electronic shock. That's why you have to have a ballast. It absorbs a ton of energy and blasts that bulb with a huge hit of energy, causes all the electrons inside the bulb to start freaking out and fluoresce and light up. And that's why that gives off light. As those electrons are bouncing around inside, they're freaking out, they hit the particles of phosphors on the inside of the bulb, and then they basically burn it. And those particles of phosphors that get burned, when it burns, it takes that energy and it takes it from a visible light where we can see it and bounces it into the invisible spectrum of ultraviolet. And then you're trying to change the chemical composition of those phosphors to peak at the places you want them to. What people don't realize, I can make a bulb that peaks wherever I want it to. So I can make it so it has a perfect amount of UVB, but then I can also make it so it has so much UVC your animal cooks like it's in a microwave. So underneath, and that actually kind of happened in the industry around 2008. Some manufacturers got some tube bulbs, the phosphor mixture was off, and it caused a bunch of animals to go blind, and they died from it. It was a huge recall, and then that stigma stayed with fluorescent lighting from that moment on. But the problem was no one understood what was wrong. They just went, somebody had a light and their animal died, fluorescent's bad, never use it again. And then the rumor mill started, and then everybody having an opinion about something they didn't know about. But that's what happened. But that's how UV is created out of fluorescent bulbs. And that's why you can use your UVB meter, but you can't just use your UVB meter, because you'd be missing that UVC spectrum and you wouldn't even know it was wrong. So then there's the other side, which is the UV index. Now, Dr. Francis Baines and some other people have done some studies talking about Ferguson zones and the UV index, and that's where everybody's moved to. But there's a problem with using the UV index too. Like I said, I think when we got caught up, when we were off, is if you think about the sun, there's solar flares, there's clouds, there's different humidities, there's things that affect the sunlight that gets down to Earth. But overall, the sun's a pretty consistent output. Like, it's going to be in a week, if every day is clear, the humidity is the same, all the environmental conditions on Earth are the same, and the sun's not having some crazy flares or anything, you're going to get basically the same. In my backyard, I'm going to get almost the same UV reading and UVB and UV index every day in a short period. Over the seasons, things like that, it changes, whatever. But it's not going to change that much. So with manufactured bulbs, that's not totally the case, because you're not measuring something that's consistent. And the UV index was actually created by a Canadian meteorologist. It's a weighted system to weight it weights UVA, B, and C. So UVC is barely weighted at all. It's super, super minimal. If you have a ton of UVA, doesn't really there's no bad thing to it. It can't get hurt from a ton of UVA, so it doesn't put much weight on it. UVB, it kind of has a little bit of weight, because you can overdo UVB and get into a dangerous area, even with sunlight. And then UVC is extremely heavily weighted, because even tiny bits of UVC can cause massive changes in sunburns. And that's what the UV index is actually for. It was actually created as a formulation of those three UV wavelengths to tell you, if you have fair skin and the UV index is from here to here, you're going to get a sunburn outside in about an hour. And that's what the UV index is for. But now we've kind of changed it to taking a look at reptiles and UV lighting. So what that's doing is it's taking a reading of A, B, and C on a weighted scale. Again, that's a good way to do it outside because UV A, B, and C aren't going to be too different generally, other than if you get further away from the sun. If you're in a desert, different climates are going to change it, but it's going to be pretty consistent every day. So, but what that doesn't do is when you're talking about bulbs that are manufactured, I can make a bulb that has no UVC, a little bit of UVB, and a crazy insane amount of UVA, and have a UV index of 12.
Does that exist?
No, it doesn't exist, but it could happen. So that I'm just saying, like, that's a thing I could manufacture. Then I could take a bulb that has no UVC, no UVA, and just UVB and make it a pretty high output, and that would have a UV index of 12 at 12 inches. Then I could take a bulb that has no UVA, no UVB, and a tiny little bit of UVC, and that one would measure 12 on the UVA at 12 inches. So I could make 3 bulbs that are totally different. Most of them would kill 2 of the 3 will kill your animal, but under UV index, they all read the same. So you really need to look at both. You need to look at the UV index to see if there's a high amount of output of UVC and make sure you're within a steady range that's safe for your animal, and that's what the Ferguson zones are. And then you need to use your UVB to see where the level of UVB at 295 actually is. Either way, you can kind of use them to tell how well your bulb is projecting UV if it's burned out over time. But the only way you can truly know if you have a good bulb and that is safe and doesn't have a ton of UVC and is giving off the UVB that's needed by your animal is to use both meters.
All right,
both meters. Okay.
Now, okay, this is where I'm actually not really well rehearsed in at all. So, okay, now what would our monitors? Now, would Australian monitors and our Indonesian species have different necessities of UV?
Oh, absolutely. So you have different Ferguson zones, and that's basically what the Ferguson zones are. Is it's ranges of UV index that make sense for animals on where they come from. So
like the jungle animals would have lower.
Yeah, but it's not totally like jungle desert, and that is my biggest pet peeve in our hobby is that we separate things into jungle and desert. Just as a quick sidebar, there's a huge amount of habitats between the top of the dunes of the Sahara and the bottom of the rainforest. So we can't just design crap for those because we miss 99.9% of where everything else lives. Anyway,
but you see where my questions are coming from? They're basically an inexperienced person with not really understanding basic. I would keep in captivity. I would keep an Argus like I would keep.
Like a beardy or anything?
Almost.
Or
almost.
Depending on which one,
Right, and so, in a little bit different, I guess I would probably have more sand for the Argus, but I have most of my mangrove monitors, they just like much more cover than anything.
Yeah.
It's like they rather just peek their heads out and have cover. Even the tame ones would rather be under cover.
And that's what the change is. That's what the change is in the UV index. It's not that if I go to Indonesia and then I go to Australia and I'm out in the bare sun in the middle of the day, I'm going to get massively different UV readings. You will, because you're closer or further away from the equator, the atmosphere is thicker in different places. Around the Earth, it still changes based on cloud cover, how the atmosphere health is, if there's holes in the ozone, all that stuff's going to change it. It's steady in one spot, though.
Yeah.
Kind of. But this is what's all of those things matter when it comes to what kind of UV needs you have. That's why those Ferguson zones change. So tropical animals like the mangrove monitors and like my spinulosus, the Offenburg Timors, all of those Indonesian species, generally you're looking at like probably a UV index around 2 to 2.5, maybe 2 to 3, 2.5. So not too crazy, but for like your desert, Odatria from Australia, you're looking at like 4.5 or higher. But what's crazy is it's not just about desert and tropical, because the animals that like the most UV and that actually do zone 4 and up to like 8.5 UV index, which is the highest you want to go before you can really start messing up your animals. Cyclura. They live on the ground, but they live in the Caribbean in a super tropical area, but they live out on rocks in the rocky areas out in this bare sun on the coast. So they get in the open at the equator, they're getting hit with the gnarliest heavy UV, and they sit on the open along like hillsides, along beaches and things like that, where there's no cover or there's little shrubs and stuff, and they just get blasted with it. So like it's not totally where they're from as much as how they're utilized. It is, but there's more factors than just like tropical desert leaves. Not there's more things that go into what they would actually see when they're out there.
All right. Yeah, that's great information. I think the numbers now. I guess if we can, what do you guys got going on there?
Oh, nothing. I'm having technical difficulties, but I'm back.
Good.
All right. Okay,
we are recording still.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, as far as numbers go now, you mentioned like 2, 2.5, 3.
Yeah.
Now that would be on a UVB meter or
UV index.
UV index. Okay.
Yep.
So now there's two things. My friend Damon was mentioning me this too, because he is also a chameleon guy, and he also utilizes it for his exotic birds too.
Oh yeah.
And so he was just telling me, it's not just to use one, but you want to get the other one too. Now, okay. I guess for me, I'm still trying to just put how you're mentioning those two, right?
Yeah. So here, let me hit you with the numbers. You got a pen? I'll give you guys all your numbers you need to know.
Yeah.
So
hey, everybody get a pen.
Yeah, everybody get ready. So first of all, UV index.
Yeah.
The number you need to know is 295 nanometers. That is where reptiles synthesize D3. For the UVB, that's the wavelength. UVB. When it comes to UVB output, I'm also going to tell you this. That's kind of funny. I've been researching UV and read more articles than I want to even tell you in many languages that I don't know how to speak, just by Google Translate for 7 weeks straight.
That's great, man. That's great.
Yeah, but like, dude, they knew this stuff back in the 1940s, and we still don't know it in the hobby, which is crazy to me. But when it comes to the UVB, there hasn't ever really been a study that I can find that follows around a bearded dragon in the wild and says, okay, he gets this much UVB, but he's only out for this much time on this rock. So we calculate this much and we multiply it. He has this many microwatts per square centimeter per hour, and done that to figure out how much do they actually absorb over time that they're out in the open absorbing it. And then how do we take that and stretch that out over a 12-hour period under a lower output? That's what we actually need to do to know what the UVB output is and actually have a scientific reason behind it. As far as I know, and I could probably call Gary Bagnall from ZoomEd. He's the one that really – he's the inventor basically of UVB for reptiles and fluorescent tubes and stuff. So he has some information back from like 1993 when they first came out, but I can't find it. So I think kind of what also sort of happened is it was, let's make one with some UVB. We know they need it. We know we can read it. At 12 inches, we're going to try 10 microwatts, 20 microwatts, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and we're going to put them across a bunch of animals and then see where do we start seeing detrimental effects of hypocalcemia or hypercalcemia. And I don't have any reason to say that that's what happened. That's the only thing I can rationally think of where we got to the numbers we got to. But generally, for tropical animals, you want to hit 25 microwatts per square centimeter at 12 inches. And for desert animals, you want to be at about 50.
Something that you mentioned as far as just somebody following around a bearded dragon out in the wild. I wish we had those type of studies over a long term, throughout the seasons, different years to study this kind of stuff. But unfortunately, we don't. An idea I've wanted to do, it takes a lot of time and money. It's just, study to basically a clutch, half the clutch with things, half the clutch without. Yep. And just to see for us what happens. And it's not even to prove a point to anybody. It's just, what can we learn from this? And of course, that's captivity. That's not even the wild. But
I've seen that in like crested geckos. The Gilpins did their own little study, years ago. They did different temperatures for incubating crested geckos, and they took all these measurements on the baby when they came out, and it was really, really cool to see like how many more days it took these cooler animals to hatch. But their tail base was thicker. The crests on their head were more developed. They were stockier, and they got going better. Like, it was just really interesting that, you can hatch them out at room temp. But if you go down to like 3 degrees below that, you actually get better, healthier animals. So
that's
yes,
what I
it's
do
awesome
too.
to see that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really incubate at 86 and 87, 88 like people tell me to. I incubate like 83, 84 ish. I did even start at one point to do it at 81, but yeah, I didn't want to wait 210 days.
Yeah. Dude, the peacocks that we hatched out, we had them at 83. And to me, it doesn't. If I'm hatching out bearded dragon eggs at 88, why would I think that the dirt they bury it in is the same as the dirt peacock monitors on Roddy Island? That's a tiny island in the Pacific Ocean. Why would I think that they have the same temperature dirt as a bearded dragon in the middle of the desert? Like, it just doesn't make sense. And I know people like to kind of standardize things, but we do that too much and we make things too simple. And while reptiles do have an ease to care for, they are easier than like a dog or a cat to an extent. It doesn't make you actually analyze that. Easier doesn't mean like non-existent care. It just means you don't have to scoop 27 pounds of crap every Friday afternoon. And you don't have to go for 3 walks a day, and I don't have to go buy a big bag of food. Like, it's easier in that regard, but there's still care there.
Except for those retic keepers out there. They might have something to say about shoveling the poop, but
yeah, well, as soon as one of them shows me a very well-defined muscular retic that has room to climb and be arboreal like a wild one, then we'll have a discussion about that. Anyway, sorry, I love all my retic guys. I'm just saying, think about it. But otherwise, so the numbers thing. So UVB, you want to be at like 25 for tropical, 12 inches, or even or like just 25 for tropical. We're at your basking spot. So if your basking spot's further away, you might end up actually using a desert bulb, and then you're going to measure until you hit about 25, and that's where you want that basking platform to be. Now, if you go desert, you want to hit about 50 microwatts per square centimeter. Again, that's what Zilla uses. That's what I see a lot out there. And then with using Zilla lights for so long and the coils, seeing the UVB outputs, having all the data on them and all the other lighting companies, I've really kind of hunkered into like, I don't know exactly how we got to that number, but it makes sense, and it makes sense for the animals, and they do well on it.
So you use Zilla compact bulbs instead of Zoomed or another brand? Yeah.
So and this is not because I've worked with Zilla. It's literally to be totally honest. Yeah, it really is. We did when I was a year into working there. They did an independent study with a company called Bureau Veritas, which is known for doing very independent studies. You don't get to pay them to make your bulb say what you want it to. Like, you pay them and then you cross your fingers that everything you did was right, and when it comes back, you don't look like an idiot. So that's kind of how that went. But the whole thing was, hey, can you guys take our coils, Zoomed coils, Exoterra coils, and test them all, and then give us the results? And I got a stack of paper about that big back, and me and our R&D guys went through it, and we looked at what the outputs were. And to be totally honest, it was one of the first times in the hobby that it was like a punch in the chest, because I'm like, some of these bulbs are desert bulbs that don't put out enough UVB for your animal to use. And that's something I found with the Exoterra's bulbs, which was frustrating for me, especially because I used a lot of Exoterra, coming into the hobby, and their bulbs were always cheaper, so it was nice for an entry-level person. But then after testing them, I and my wife, being in the exotic veterinary field for 15 years, she's seen people who religiously change their bulb every 6 months still have hypocalcemia and MBD because they were using one of those bulbs. Zoomed's bulbs aren't bad, but the Zilla bulbs do have a way higher output than any of the other ones.
Now, the cages behind you is the bulb you're talking about?
So these are actually. Do I have one sitting out here?
We got to explain. Gotta explain to the listeners.
Sorry, you guys that are listening. He's basically got a really dope setup behind him where these cages are really decked out. I can only see part of them, but from the bottom half, they're well lit. So,
So what I did with these is I wanted to do more customizable lighting, and I didn't want to put a ton of like sockets in there. So Zilla came out with it's called the Pro Soul fixture. It's a maybe 6 inches wide, 1.5 inches tall, and it's got all of these are the 20 inches up here because that's the 24-inch cage. That's all I could do, and all of the ones below are 30-inch, two 30-inch fixtures next to each other. So that those spinulosis cages are 6 foot, That gives me 6 foot with 12 different sockets that I can put different heat, UV, plant lights, and I can totally create a gradient of lighting, bright lighting, UV lighting, and heat from one end totally to the other. And I can just by tweaking and moving things around, I can customize it to exactly what I need it. So that's what those are. And then up there, they've got a 20-inch. And again, the 20-inch is 4 sockets, so I can mix around heat, night heat, day. And then they all have built-in timers. So these all just shut themselves off and on every day, and it's awesome. And one thing I do like about the mini stuff was Zilla's mini stuff, the mini halogen bulbs, I can spray that whole fixture with a hose. I can take a hose and squirt it in the fixture and hit the bulbs, and they won't break. And they're they're like 500 degrees on the surface. So like that's a huge thing, especially when you're talking monitors and indo and humidity. Yeah. The biggest thing with anybody using a mercury vapor or a metal halide is if a tiny microscopic bubble of mist touches that thing, it's going to blow up. So like it's always like, the cool, there was $50. I could just thrown it away. Appreciate that. Yeah. So like that sucks. And then you've got glass everywhere. You got to get out of the enclosure. And that's one thing I like about the mini halogen. And then because these use the mini sockets, I use the smaller mini UVB bulbs. So the cool thing with UV too is that the bulbs that we have, the more you add to an area, they're not perfectly additive, but it is additive. So if you have one bulb and you're hitting like 50 microwatts at 12 inches, and you take another one and stick it next to it, now you'll be hitting like 85 at 12 inches. Maybe do another one, you hit like 110. Like it'll add. So it's not just putting more space. The closer they are together, they actually add on to each other. So you'll get more additive output. And that's what all of these are. Because those outputs for those small bulbs it's not that high, but I can put a ton of them in there and add them all together. And now I'm getting a really cool high hotspot, high area of high UV, less UV across it. I mean, I can change everything. And that's really what I liked about that. That's why I went with them. There are some setbacks to them, like just having that fixture in there kind of always freaks me out. If they grab it, all my spinulosis think it's the greatest thing ever to get up onto the fixture, grab the bulb, and just go boom and yank it out. So, and then they bury it or throw it in their water bowl, so I have to take it apart and let it dry out for 2 days, and then go put it back in, and then they pull it back out again, and just that stuff. Or that they can like access the halogens. I left them open without a screen around them because they're. If you guys have monitors, you're idiots, dude. They're gonna hang there. They're gonna basically shoot a laser through their guts and then just die and cook stuck there. Like they just don't move. They just kind of zone out. And they're like, I can smell myself cooking, but I really don't feel like moving. So it's like I didn't want to do that. I'm like, at least this case, if you go up and touch the bulb, you're going to get that insane hot burn like on your hand. Hopefully it's not, you didn't touch it long enough to hurt yourself, and they won't touch it. It's not a slow burn. So that intense pointed heat, pointed pain, they sense that, and that should learn, and then they don't touch it. And that's happened. Like I don't have anybody with burns. I don't have anybody. They get close. They tongue flick at it. I think like the hair on the end of their tongue gets kind of close, and they go, nope, not that. And then they find the other bulbs that aren't hot, and they just yank all those out. But that made it kind of nice. So
I use the same setups, basically the Zilla Pro Sols in a lot of my cages. A big reason for me going to that for the people that might be in California is we can't get regular incandescent light bulbs anymore. You have to like.
I get mine shipped in.
I can attest to you doing some shady stuff just to get some light bulbs in here.
Yeah, right? I got guys in other states just shipping me stuff. I mean, there's one bulb that 1000bulbs.com will send me, and it's a 40-watt par 38 still, and I love that bulb. It's like the perfect wattage, perfect size, and that's what it's my usage, right? And they still send me those, but man, anything else?
Then we're gonna edit that part out so I can get mine.
And nobody else screws that up for you. Yeah. No, absolutely. Like I had people that were like, dude, you should come out to California. And I'm like, no, I'm good.
I use those things here. I get those G9 bulbs. I've been able to mess around with it. Now it has taken some messing around with.
Absolutely. Even in these, I had to, dude. Like, I put in the same bulbs I would have on a glass tank in a PVC enclosure, and the heat, the insulation of that is, I almost turned that thing into a freaking oven.
Those little bulbs are strong.
They're super strong. These cages are 2x2x3, and there's 125-watt heat lamp in the top, and that's heating the whole thing.
So does Zilla? So I know this is the company that makes it where you have to press it in, right?
Yep, they're two little prongs. Yep.
Now do they make a bulb that you can that comes with a socket or no?
They don't. You can buy a socket adapters for them if you find them online. But the only thing that sucks about that is the reflector that's being used by the bulb massively changes the way that bulb works.
Yeah.
So if you use like the mini domes that Zilla has,
the thing that connects to it, right?
Well, there's multiple different fixtures that you could put this in, and if you were to take the screw-in adapter and say you had a dome, or if you're using an open socket and you put the screw-in adapter and then plug that in, it's not going to be that effective below because it's not a spotlight. It's more like an old incandescent where it just pushes the heat everywhere. So you have to have a really good reflector to put that energy down. And with the mini domes that Zilla has, it's a mirrored parabolic reflector. It intensifies that heat. It makes it 258% more effective than the same wattage incandescent. But if you were to do that in these, you don't get nearly the same output because that's a gutter reflector and it moves the light around a lot differently. So
what would you recommend for a setup like mine? Mine is our typical setup where it's a bank of lights. I would like to take out one bulb and screw in the UV bulb along those bank of lights. What would be a good bulb that you recommend? That's a coil bulb. Essentially, some enclosures I won't be able to hook up. That's my case right now. I have a couple enclosures that have the linear bulbs, and then I have a couple that have a mega rays, and those are just sold like singular bulbs. But I'm looking to utilize these other cages that aren't currently using UVB and just using heat. I want to add a compact bulb. What would you recommend possibly for like a 8 to 10 inch range distance?
For those guys, honestly, dude, the Zilla Tropical 20 watt, or you could even do the 13 watt. The outputs actually aren't that different. The 13 watt is probably good at like, you said like 8 to 10 inches. Be perfect.
You said Zilla, right? And it screws into the socket? Okay.
Yep, it's a screw-in coil. Don't do the Canopy series that come in a box. You're going to want the ones they're the Pro series that come in like a plastic clamshell. Those are the higher output ones. We put out another... Zilla put out another bulb a couple of years ago that we called the Canopy series, and that was more aimed at, we needed to get at a cheaper price point where people could access it better because the higher end ones just weren't doing well with entry level people. And they kept going to like the Exoterra or Amazon knockoff weird stuff that just was killing their pets. And so we needed one that was lower price but still good enough. And that's what those Canopy series are. So I kind of aimed it more at like, this is more for animals that are crepuscular or lower output type animals. Don't use this for your beardy, but so those are good bulbs, but not in a big enclosure like yours. That's a 20 long UV bulb, not a 4x4x8 UV bulb.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what I'm using them for. I'm trying to use them for 6 and 8 foot enclosures in the bank of in lamps. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is if you can get like a piece of metal and curl it and put it around that bank, you'll intensify the outputs of every bulb you're using. So you can kind of create your own reflector to really solidify that lighting on their basking area, especially if you're doing like a platform, because you're losing a ton of light with the UV. You're going to lose a ton of light that's going sideways and up and everywhere else. But if you get that reflector in there, especially if it's like a polished metal or it's got like Mylar where it's really reflective, you'll get insane UV outputs. For example, if you take a standard dome and you put the Desert 50 Zilla in it, it's got a white painted interior, black outside. That white paint, you'll get 50 microwatts, 55 microwatts if it's a brand new bulb. You'll get 55 microwatts at 12 inches. If you put that in a polished silver dome, you'll get 260 microwatts at 12 inches. It insanely intensifies by taking all of that. It's taking all that lighting that's going off to the sides and getting absorbed by that white paint and reflecting it all back down. So you're truly, if you use a bulb totally open, like just in a screw-in socket, or you use it in a white reflected or painted dome, you're only getting about 20% of what that bulb actually has for output.
And just for the new people out there that are listening to this, I started off, you might go to a garage sale, pick up this, pick up that off of, Facebook or wherever you're picking it up from. But these are little things that you might not be aware of that I had to kind of learn over time. Just as you said, Ryan, with the white paint on the inside, or different domes are going to react differently depending on how deep they are, how wide they are. So I've tried, in my circumstance, I've tried to really standardize what I use so that I know what I'm messing with.
You know what to expect. You know what to expect when you put it together.
I'm trying to get a little ghetto rigged here, kind of like MacGyver this stuff. So,
dude, you're a reptile guy. We all do it. We're all MacGyvers.
Yeah, right.
Cheap ass MacGyvers.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is wood taped where the bulbs are, where that bulb is, could just aluminum taped up there.
Oh yeah, that'd be fine.
All right.
Yeah, you're like drive around and find somebody that's chucking out a busted mirror and just take it and cut some panels off it. Like literally anything. You just need to reflect light. Doesn't matter what you're using.
Because that's what I'm trying to see.
That'd be easy, dude.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, what I've been doing is, as I'm getting into breeding, and I haven't been really breeding monitors for decades. I've been keeping them for a long time, but I've been only really catching them for the last few years, right? And so I was doing some of them well, and obviously I only have so results. Like I'm not hatching out 100% hatch rate all the time. I'm only hatching out a few of those eggs, or only a few eggs are coming out fertile rather than all 8 to 10 eggs or something like that, right? And so I basically am trying to do better to get better results or do something different. Because at one point I was at a point where I wasn't using UV at all, just whole food prey items, and then I started questioning my own husbandry. Also I'm trying to adopt everything that I can from the outside: soil, food, humidity, heat. But why am I not adopting UV?
Dude, right? It's so funny to me. You get these guys who are like, I built this room for my monitor, and it's a freaking jungle. There's trees planted in the ground, and it's like there's frogs everywhere, and it's literally like you're standing in the rainforest. And I'm like, dude, that's awesome. Where's the UV? And they're like, I don't really need it. Wait, the sun is an imperative part of the wild. The sun. And it's the only way you can get this lighting. So, you're kind of not recreating their natural environment if you do it in a place where you're taking the sun.
You're just missing the key aspects,
Exactly. When you're looking at how they see UVA, dude, seriously, anybody listening, Google how bees see UVA. And if you take a look at how a bee or birds see each other, it's insanely different than what you see. It's not like, oh, we see a red flower and they see like a pinkish one. We see a red flower with a white circle in it, looks like a bullseye. They see a yellow flower with black racing stripes. It's completely different how those animals see their environment. And that comes down to their food, their burrowing habits, the things they like, all that stuff. They're going to see their world differently. And if you're not putting that light in there, you're basically making them colorblind. And that also might have to do with a lot of animals and why. I was talking to this with some bird people because there's a lot of crossover with bird, especially with UV lighting. KT is part of the Central Garden and Pet, and we're cousin company to Zilla. And I was talking to some of their people, and I'm like, if you put any of this food you're trying to put out there, like they're asking about different colors and what people thought. And like, did you put any of it under a UVA light? And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, it may look really colorful and like all fruity and amazing, and then you put it under a UV light and it looks like a pile of rat crap. Like it might just be brown and awful. And the birds might only pick through it and pick certain things out of their food because with no UVA lighting, that's the least gross looking gray blob. So there's a huge difference. And when you're not providing them with that, you're really not providing them with a natural environment or the ability to act naturally.
Yeah. All right. Man, that's great. Yeah, great way to put things.
And Ryan was talking about me, folks. I got a lot of things set up, but
yeah, I mean, it's just it's no one's fault. I think it's
old information.
Yeah, right. And both sides have success. You see people show results without using UV, and there's people that obviously are seeing positive results with it. I myself are one of those people, and I'm kind of on both because I obviously have cages that still don't have UV, and I'm just still going with the diet, and I still have those animals reproductively cycle, still do the whole thing. Am I seeing better results with using UV in the eggs and such like that, and the animal's response to everything, its usage and all that? Yes. I definitely do see it, though.
Anybody that wants like solid data on this difference, 2 or 3 years ago, I was down at the Arlington show, and I was sitting there, and it was really dead for a little bit at the NARBC. It's happening this weekend right now. I'm not there. I'm stuck in Illinois. I was down there, and over the intercom was, this young 14-year-old Grayson Offerman is going to talk about lychees. And dude, with all the education and stuff I do, and like kids are any kid that likes reptiles, dude, you're my new favorite. I don't care. Like, I'm all about it. You want a lizard? I'll get you a lizard. You want tanks? I'll give you tanks. Whatever you need. You want to call me? You want my personal number? I don't care. I have like kids that call me all the time. I'm like, yeah, that's how you set up your thing. Whatever. I want kids to be successful. Like, that's the goal, right? So I heard that, and I'm like, that's kind of rad. This 14-year-old kid's breeding lychees. So I talked to my coworker that was at the booth, and I'm like, it's pretty dead. You care if I jump in there? She's like, no, whatever. So I went and watched his talk. Awesome talk, really knew his stuff, was having great success with his animals. And again, lychees, right, being something that they're nocturnal, they're a gecko, they don't need UV. That's stupid. Why would we do that? They never see all that crap. So I went up to him afterwards, and I was like, hey, he didn't mention anything, but I'm like, Grayson, have you ever used UVB on your lychees? And or UV on your lychees? He's like, well, they don't really need it. They're nocturnal. And I'm like, so let me also explain to you that no reptile on the planet is totally nocturnal. Amphibians can be. Reptiles aren't. They're crepuscular, and they hunt at night because their prey's out at night, and because it's not as hot at night in most of the places where they're at. But they're also out during the day when they're digesting their prey, and they need to bask, and they need a temperature gradient. And at night, there's no temperature gradient, and there's no UV, and there's no anything. So there is no nocturnal reptiles. Yeah. So let's start there. Anyway, but I'm like, but think about that. If they're crepuscular, or they come out during the day to bask or hit a little bit of light, things like that.
Dawn and dusk.
Yeah, crepuscular is out at dawn and dusk, so they don't get high output UVB, but they don't need it because their skin is thinner, and it doesn't reflect. Like bearded dragons and iguanas, and especially high UV need animals, have crystalline structures in their skin that reflect back a lot of the UV lighting. Otherwise, they have thicker skin, and they have structures in there to protect them. Because if you sit on a rock in the desert in Australia in the middle of the day in the summer, and you're on it for more than 8 nanoseconds, you're going to turn into jerky. So they have, they need to be able to not just get hammered with UV. Geckos don't have that. They have super thin skin. They absorb a lot of it from just dusk and dawn. So I talked to him about this, and I was like, look, here, Grayson, how about this? I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to give you, come over to my booth. I'm going to give you a bunch of lights for free. I want you to take them home. And this next breeding season, I want you to raise this one set of babies with UV lighting and one set of babies without it. And then just anecdotally tell me what you see. So I did that, right? And then not this last October, the year before, when the last Tinley that happened, he came up at the Gecko Symposium, and I told Nathan Hall, I'm like, dude, Grayson Offerman, he did this study, and he told me about it. He's like, I kind of wrapped it all up. Dude, he turned his closet into a lab. I mean, he had data, he had micrometer measurements of tails and legs, and I mean, it was crazy. He took this, I was like, just tell me if these ones seem more active and eat more or not. Just anecdotally write down some thoughts. And he's like, no, he made this crazy study and just rocked it out. And he showed me some of this stuff, and I'm like, dude, this is rad what you found. I knew you'd find it. That's why I wanted you to do this. But it's really cool how you put all this stuff together. So I told Nathan Hall when he wanted to do the Gecko Symposium, like, dude, you got to get this kid in. He's got something that the whole gecko world needs to look at and hear. So he came and he does his talk, and I think you can find it through Brian Cusco or something. Those talks are available out there from the 2019 Gecko Symposium. Look for Grayson Offerman's talk. What he ended up seeing is that with lychees, cresties, and a lot of those New Caledonian species, especially, they're never given UV, and they go through they hatch, and there's a 2 to 3 month period where they eat and they do well, but they don't really grow. They just kind of stagnate for a little bit, and then they start on this curve that you can track. That pretty standard. They'll grow in a burst, and then they plateau, and then they burst, and you can kind of track it pretty standard over their age. What he noticed was the ones that had UV lighting didn't have that 2 to 3 month lag. It cut the lag out, and they started growing on that track the day they hatched. And a bigger part of it was those animals were noticing their food and eating a lot more food than the other ones, and that was the only difference. They were even in the same like greenhouse canopy thing, so that all the humidity was the same, the temperatures were the same. The only difference was UV lighting, and those animals saw that difference because of that UV lighting. They recognized food and they ate their food more regularly. And then the other thing too, when you get UVA and you have an animal that like, dude, tell me you do well when you're depressed as hell and you don't want to go outside and you don't want to talk to anybody. You're not really eating and doing real great. And if you're not getting that UVA for that serotonin, those animals are basically in a constant state of seasonal depression. But you give them that, now they see they're more active, they're more natural, they're out more, they're moving more, their body tone is better, they grow faster, they eat better. Like, it's a ton of different stuff. And again, that's the UVA lighting that everybody doesn't know what it is or think it matters. And it gigantically changes how those animals react to their environment. So like his talk literally laid out these graphs, all the data laid out, and it wasn't like in a lab, but he put dang close with what he did. But it was all real measured data, and his dad's an exotic veterinarian. So like they really took it seriously, and it was incredible. He ended up putting UV on all of his geckos just because it was a massive difference, especially in the hatchlings, with how quickly they grew. And that's stuff that you see with that kind of thing. That's why, like, dude, there's nothing that doesn't need UV. I put UV on everything. Everything. There's nothing in my house that doesn't have UV on it.
So let me, for the listeners out there, and even that talk that I had originally had with you on the phone, I said, hey, explain it. Because, I mean, unfortunately, with Facebook, social media, you know, we divide into camps. And a lot of times I'm not trying to get in a camp. I just want things to make sense to me.
Right.
You know? And so there's a little back and forth over the years, not between me and you, but with other people about, you must do this. Okay, why?
Because Frank Reed said so. Or somebody else said
from
so.
1985 that hatched him, and he does a lot of stuff. He does it that way. He still does it the same way he did it in 1985, and he has great success. But you know what? You can still use the same cell phone you had in 1985, and you can still call people, but you're not going to appreciate it that freaking much. Like, the technology changes, our knowledge changes. Like, we should always be trying to learn more. And that's where this UV thing starts to make all the problems, is because the camps are, we've been doing it this way and it works, why would we change it? Versus we now know more and we have better technology and we're able to do more. Why don't you want to?
Yeah.
Right. And to be honest, that's where I got
thinking differently.
Yeah. Where I got into this was, okay, because of the past history, kind of the mentality of, this is how you get to the dance, you know. This has been shown to work, so this is where I started, basically.
Right.
Now, and you mentioned it, there were some bad bulbs that came out at one point. Yeah. Would you say that in the past, as we've gone along this progression in technology and lighting, has there been some bad science along the way, unfortunately?
I wouldn't say there's honestly been much for bad science. There's actually an enormous amount of science on UV and reptiles. Like, anybody who doesn't have Google Scholar saved in their like top bar of their browser needs to. Like, don't ask me for a care sheet. Don't ask me how to take care of something. What I'm going to tell you is go get the seasonal data from the place they come from and match that. Then I'm going to tell you to go on Google Scholar and type in the Latin name of the species and start reading. Start looking at what are the gut contents of that animal in the wild when it was found, or when it was actually discovered.
Told them to do like a dictionary's work.
I know, right? Like go. Like here's what kills me with the hobby right now too is the idea of like, I just need a care sheet. I'm like, dude, if you think I can tell you how to successfully keep, breed, and keep healthy and active and happy any animal on one page, you're an idiot. Yeah. On one page, I can tell you how not to kill it, but that's the best I can do.
Yeah,
you won't kill it right away, but that's the best I'm going to get you. Like,
some people ask me for like, you know, how do you keep breeding? I'm like, I apologize, I just can't tell you that in one conversation.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is breeders need to look at this differently too. How I set up my snakes to breed in tubs isn't how I should sell them to someone who's like, this is going to be my first snake. You tell them, you put it in a tub that's dark and you don't see it, and then you put it under your bed and you can just hide it there all the time and take it out when you want it. And guess what? That kid forgets he has a snake, and when he goes to take it out, it's not as active as it was because it's crispy. Like you need to tell them to like do this, enjoy it, see all they're active, get them excited about it, and get them on the right path right away. But yeah, no, it's this mentality that everything has to be cheap and quick and easy. And with the hobby, it's not bad science, it's laziness, and I'll say it and I don't care. It's laziness. We did it that way, it works that way, so we're going to keep doing it that way. Even though there's science and stuff and a million examples that prove that this is bad.
Keeping it onto monitors, there are a fair amount of species that are done. A lot of the Salvador species, a lot of the Australian species, not all of them, but most of them.
Oh yeah.
But there are many Indonesian species and African species that aren't regularly done, and there's people that have adults, there's people that have that are trying, and it's not like people aren't trying. There are a lot of people that are actually putting forth and buying groups of animals. I know people that have dozens of roughnecks and pairs of Niles, and people are really trying, but it's not that easy. And so we're trying to really unlock those species more now. And now I guess it's like a great time to transition into the second part of the conversation with our Indo species. Some of them are as easy as heat them and feed them, but not all of them really just take to that where they're just going to be you're just going to pound it with food, and when they breed, she's going to lay, and it's just like that. It's not that easy where just the whole stressful scenario of the animal comes into play, but like we talk about acclimating and really getting them good with being in captivity and being able to show us signs without being freaked out too much, right? Or frantic and stuff like that.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, there's so many things that we're I think against the Indo species, but there's a lot of stuff that's causing them to be a bigger focus. You in particular are one of the reasons they're getting a better focus, is because people are seeing somebody have continuous success with what they're doing and paying attention and continuously hatching mangroves. That's awesome. There's a dude in Central Illinois that continuously hatches out melanus. That's awesome. Like, there's people who are doing it. And then I think what stopped that from happening in the first place is Indo is always cheap imports, and so is Africa. So there's no value there. But now that there's value, people are looking at it. Like the peacock monitors. Dude, I used to get them for $50. They were just like this. It was the same as a water or anything else. Nobody cared.
$75 lizard.
Yeah. Now I hit up a guy that had a pair up the other day, and he's like, I want $1,800. And I'm like, Jesus. I'm like, I need to just sell them I feel like I'm in the stock market and I just won and I'm going to hold on to them too long, but I like them too much and I don't care about the value. But it's like, now it's hard, but that whole thing happened because now we can't get them anymore. And now people want them and they want to breed them, but the problem is they're also not. There's this mentality of, okay, the monitor guys. Yeah. Brandon Shiflett is the guy for Australian Odatria. You want rare? You go to Rare Earth for any. He builds zoological enclosures in his basement. It's unreal. He knows more about those animals than anybody I've ever met.
Yeah, his insight has helped me so much, and it's okay. Like, what would be a normal suggestion would be 65, 65 is the lowest, right? 75 is what you kind of want to have your cool side. He actually mentioned that his are taking 40s and 50s without a problem. And I sent mine into that this last winter, and they're almost unstoppable now.
Yeah,
and,
I want to test more with
I really am doing stuff that is a little bit different. Same thing with my mangroves. I'm not keeping them so hot and feeding them a ton. It's more so of now, I guess we can get into our Indo species is I prepare them months in advance to when I really want them to breed. So it's not just about, all right, I'm gonna kick your stuff into gear now, and we're gonna start feeding you a ton or something like that. It's actually the whole maintenance feeding and taking it all down, whatever they were eating and stuff like that. I'm really taking them down, keeping their muscle mass and water weight still, but I'm not feeding them a ton. It's very, very small fragments of stuff right now. Let's say if in the southern atmosphere, they're going to start breeding August, October, November, December, January, February, stuff like that, right? The southern hemisphere is going to be breeding in that time. And you can see it now. So many people in the last few months have had their monitors lay for them. It's just normal now. And now what you're trying to do is you want to take that into account, right? And so that's what I've taken is Alex mentioned to me it is okay to do your normal thing and pinpoint it, but you just have to really work against the weather. What I was doing was not really working against the weather so much, and he just mentioned to me that you can follow the southern hemisphere, and that's sort of when they would breed. So I would have a lot of my stuff already paired up together. Now, some of them would be really fat, and some of them would they would be paired up right during that time. Now, I wasn't really getting success unless it was animals that were super lean. Then when they went into that whole period, it was now they're getting their fat reserves and going through the cycling period and stuff like that, right? Getting into gear. I now have to prepare in the summertime or even end of spring, summer, getting prepared for what's coming in fall and wintertime for me.
Oh, yeah.
So months and months of really maintenance feeding, making sure that they're not overfed. And my animals throw me off all the time because I pinpoint it for this winter, right, for me to be breeding, but they'll be breeding in all of a sudden again in April and summertime too. This last year was a really throw off for me because they just kept on kind of going. Some of them kept on kind of going, right?
Yeah.
And they were animals that I wasn't really feeding a ton. I was purposely trying not to. And whenever they would get fed, man, they would just throw that into usage and really get into gear. So, I think you guys are currently at a halt with all of your peacocks, right? And I think between the two of you, you guys have like 30 animals.
Yeah.
So, I would like, I talked about this before, and it's what a keeper and a mentor is always mentioned to me, because I got so much going on now. I have to be really strict with the monitors, their diet, their humidity and stuff like that. So, if you're getting into gear now, because summer's a blink of an eye away, summer's really only about 2 months, 3 months away, right? Really. And so your preparation time is then.
Yep.
And because your breeding time is right after that corner. So you only have a few months to really play with, or more so of slack on. So I really hope you don't slack on and be strict with it, because I know you might have a lot of stuff going on and things like that, right? And there's so many animals, and you just want to really pay attention to these guys. But if you can start now is their pumping season. You're going to pump them as much as you can, right? You're going to pump them as much as you can to get as much weight on them, because that whole drought period with less food coming into August, right? Things like that. When you're into summer, maybe midsummer, you can really get down to the point of not feeding so much. The temperature outside is going to be really hot, so you may not want to use a ton of heat. And the ambient heat will just have them just enough,
Yep.
But that whole time of maintenance feeding, very little food, you're taking whatever you used to drench them with, and it's now just like 50% humidity. It's no longer major spikes, right?
Yep.
And for those few months, you're doing it like that. It's basically drier, less food, less amounts of dense, just all that is just much less.
Yeah.
And you're going to do those for a few months. But once you get into those cooler weathers and the summers where animals would normally be breeding in the southern hemisphere, that's where you kick up again.
Yeah, and that's what we started doing with all of our Indo stuff. Like all of my, I was telling Alan, I've been trying to breed my Savu pythons for 12 years, and I've got, for the first time ever, I've gotten breeding the last 5-6 years. I just can't get eggs, and I couldn't figure out why. So I started tweaking some stuff this year and changed up a couple things that I was doing, and I have one for sure gravid female, and one other one that I'm pretty sure is. And then my Maclots and like a lot of the Indo stuff I was working with, it made a big difference. So we've been doing the same with the monitors. Plus, like, if you saw most people, if they saw, I've got some peacocks in the bin. Like, if you saw them, like people looked at my stuff, they'd be like, "Dude, it's skinny." It's not. Its tail base is big and fat and thick, but it's lean because giant fat animals don't breed well. or they get egg bound, or they're awful, or that I want lean natural animals. You don't find that in the wild. So my animals are lean, and then coming up to the end towards the mid end of summer, I'll just start everything in this back room just starts getting hammered. So I slow feed them all year, maintenance feed them. They all are pretty thin, but they have good musculature. They look good. And then as soon as come in a couple months, and even my tanks now, they're pretty dry. I only hit the misting system like once or twice a week. I'll dig down in the dirt and make sure there's some humidity down there. And if it's pretty humid, that's why this tank looks decent, but the rest of them are starting to look crappy because the plants are dying off because it's just hot and dry. So but that's and that's what I'm doing this weekend. Part of my list of stuff to do is get my RO system all set up so I can get more reliable on pumping all this water and all this other stuff, getting ready for that season to come. So, and I'm hoping this year ends up being a really good year for us because we've kind of gotten it dialed down, and COVID made a big difference with my monitor keeping because my desk is on the other side of this computer. I'm sitting on a chair in the middle of the room, but my desk's over here. So they're right there. And all of my spinulosis know the difference between me and everyone else in my family. And when I sit down at my desk and my hands touch my computer, they start scratching the glass like nails on a chalkboard. And it's just and smacking their tails and flinging dirt and running they're totally calm and quiet all day till my hands touch the keyboard. And then they just start getting loud and annoying and they won't stop. And I'll be on meetings and people just hear smack. So I get pissed off and go feed them a ton so they're fat and they sit out and bask, and then they shut up for the next 3 days. So they learned that during COVID, and now when they're hungry, they scrape on the glass. I'm like, you guys suck so bad. But another thing too is with people is finding food. Dude, that's the other thing with monitors in captivity is nutrition. Rodents are crap. They're crap food for everything. They're good, but they're literally manufactured to be food. Rodent breeding in the U.S. is just for production. They don't breed rodents for nutritional value. They breed them to get as many as they can, as fast as they can, and sell them as quick as they can. So they're super fat. A lot of their levels are off. They're not really what you'd want, like what you'd see out of a wild animal that had a wide range of food. And they're just fat, super fat. So that's why retics in captivity are all over and fat and huge. Tons of snakes are fat and huge. Monitors are always obese. We rarely get skinny monitors into the rescue. We get way more morbidly obese monitors that we feed once a month for 6 months and make them swim in the tub for 20 minutes every other day. And it takes that long just to get them to a point where their belly gets off the ground. People feed them wrong. And then they're just feeding one thing. I got meat. I'm just going to do rodents. Dude, we've got a place down here, there's always a local market somewhere. We've got a grocery store called Fresh Farms. And they have 80 feet of fresh seafood. I can buy a whole shark. We're buying, I'll go, I get salmon bellies and all the random scraps that they do for a lot of the different, ethnicities that live around us and cook with all these different pieces of the animal. I grab all that cheap scraps and we get salmon bellies are awesome. They're fatty. There's a ton of fish oil in it, ton of vitamin E. It's really good for their skin. And then I'll grab ton of shrimp. I've got just all this random stuff, chunks of squid. We got whole crabs to give to our some of our caimans because they eat whole mollusks, so they can bash the crap out of them. And we do anything.
I use a lot of those diets now for my stuff. It used to be just mice was the primary, and rats, and then also then chicks and stuff like that, right? But now it's mice are at the least of what I feed. I still do it here and there, but it's chicks, quail, and I use crawfish and small crabs and things like that much more often now.
Yeah, dude, they go nuts.
They can still eat
shrimp.
a lot. Yeah, they can still eat a lot, but it's basically keeping them lean still, just because the diet itself and the calcium intake is great on those.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the nice thing with anything that's got an exoskeleton. That's the other thing. People don't realize that the majority of these monitors are insectivores, even when they get bigger than you'd think they'd be insectivores. Or in Indo, in Indonesia, I mean, obviously there's a ton of animals, but there's not free roaming herds of mice. They're small rodents, but it's not like when you feed them in captivity and they get it on a plate. Like, that's a fast animal that can get into a crevice quicker than you can. Dude, they go after frogs and fish on the bank, and they eat lizards and crab, like stuff that they can pin down and grab and get into a corner. Like, that's what they're eating. They're not, and birds, eggs up in trees. They're not chasing down tiny little rodents underground. Like, that's not what they're going to do. That's not what's openly available. So these animals will eat a ton. They can get really big. They can stretch out. They've got all the lateral skin on their body and their necks to stretch out fat, the big meal. But that big meal is super, super lean. That's like fish or shrimp or, a lizard that has literally almost no fat content. Or, like same thing with some of the tree frogs. Like, they're going to have almost no fat. So they're eating a ton, but they're just getting like their proteins and a bunch of vitamins and acids. You're not getting a ton of fat content. But then when you're feeding rodents, it's other good proteins and vitamins and stuff, but it also is a ton of fat.
Yeah. Hey, excuse me 1 second, all right, you guys? I'll be right back.
No worries. Yeah, I got it. It's funny. There's a few animals though that I have that I can't get to take a second look at any kind of insect. And so I have a female cross sand monitor. She's that way. Now the male, he's like almost twice the size as her. He'll chase down a little medium-sized cricket all over the cage. He's a nut for him. It's kind of fun. But and then again with the Indo dwarf species, their food for me is so hit and miss. It's like I can offer one thing one day, and they eat it up, and then I can offer it the next week, and they won't touch it. And
that's all my peacocks are like that, dude. And it kills me because a lot of the stuff when you're doing like shrimp and fish and like frozen thawed pinky mice or something and you leave it in the tank because they're all so shy too. Like I have to put it in the back of the enclosure and then leave, and then I come back in 20 minutes. I haven't heard anything. I haven't seen them, but the food's gone. Like, so I know they're eating it, but and then they don't, and you don't go touch it right away. I leave it overnight a lot of times. And then I go in the next day and I'm like, oh, cool. That was all those mice just melted into a really pretty colorful puddle, and it smells great. Or that fish just melted into goo.
I have those talks with them. I'm like, you guys got to stop doing this to me. Or start paying rent. One or the other.
Exactly. Guys, come on. What is your thing? But that's honestly where going down to some of those markets and getting a ton of random crap. We get quail eggs, we get frog legs are a huge one, dude. You want everything likes frog legs. And shrimp has been a big one. Try.
Yeah. So I've spent about $100 down at the Asian market. I got shrimp, fish, frog legs, a different type of fish, squid, some type of crab that I haven't seen before.
Look and find. Sometimes you can find frozen locusts in there. Like one of the ones in Milwaukee, up by the work when I was up there. I go to that one. You could get trays of frozen, giant ass frozen locusts.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool because you don't have access to that until somebody started doing it. But but even then still don't have that much access to it unless you do it yourself. So that was kind of a cool option too. And there's always weird crap. As long as it's not processed and it's raw and what it is, make sure you're pretty close. Don't try and do blowfish because you think it'll be funny and just assume that they didn't hit that poisonous vein. Don't be stupid. But if it's in the section, it doesn't have a warning on it. Try it, see if they like it. If they do, great. If they don't, whatever. And variety is key with those guys. Variety and lean more towards white meat and fish rather than red meat. They don't do mammals. They don't eat that much for mammals. They don't eat red meat. It's all fish and amphibians and birds and lean.
Yeah, I've always noticed my guys get this ugly bloated feeling after I've actually fed them a piece of steak.
Yep. Dude, I was feeding all the monitors tilapia pieces. I cut up a whole bunch of tilapia. They were going to town. And then they got they were fat. They ate till they wouldn't anymore. And that's what I do twice a week. Once a week I'll go especially if it's bulk time, it's more often, but it's once a week I go in there and I just hammer them with something, blow them all up, and then they're good for the week. And that's the maintenance, throughout the year. And it's really lean, so they go down skinny real quick, and then they're nice and muscular. But dude, they just. So I ended up taking some of that fish, and I went to some of my baby snakes, and I'm like, it can't hurt. I wonder if they'd eat a fish chunk. All of my pythons ate raw fish chunks out of the tarns. All of them. have never smelled fish in their life, and they were like, "I'll eat." And my Roma python ate 4 pieces of fish. So I'm this is. I'm just started thinking about that, and I'm like, I'm just gonna start feeding everything weird crap. Like I'm just gonna walk away from rodents to an extent, almost. Like it's the staple. I have to stick with it. But like I'm trying to get some more cool stuff in there. And with snakes, it can get rough, you know.
By the pound, seafood is such much more affordable.
Right.
By the pound. Like you can get shrimp, I don't know. If you're looking at actual pieces and, that are palm size or a fair few inches worthy of a monitor lizard meal, right? Comparable to a mouse, I guess you would say, you can get so much more shrimp for just $7.
Right. Like it's probably, I bet each decent sized shrimp I buy in like a bag that's, like, I'm not lucky enough to be on the coast, and I'm not buying shrimp that's in Chicago. So that's not as fresh as you guys get it. Sorry. So like, I have to buy the package crap. But still, even then, like, you're paying like 50 cents a shrimp, and that's a decent-sized meal.
Yeah.
And the other nice thing is, for us, like I was saying, like, I get the scrap stuff that's cheap and crappy, and nobody wants it because they love it. And all the nutrition is in the scrap. Like all the organs, like when we cook a chicken, I'll pull the gizzards and that little package out. That goes right into a cup for the monitors because that is a ton of crap that I don't want to eat, and it's gross, but it's the most nutritional stuff in that bird. So it's great for them. So don't get your shrimp gross and uncleaned, and you're not how you'd eat them because that's good for them.
Yeah.
It's funny we're talking about all this stuff, but. Well, maybe I should save that. Let's continue on it. I'll come back to this, but continuing on diet stuff and hitting up those Asian markets. I have yet to try some of the stuff we've been talking about. It just hasn't fit in yet. I'm still cycling through some other food. But,
right, dude. I think I have like 10 pounds of smelt still in my freezer, and like working through that. Like I cut it up into little chunks, and I've been tongue feeding them because I'm working with trying to get them. I'm sick of chasing spinulosis through my house. So I'm just trying to get them to I'm going to open the door, but it's a good thing, guys. Like, this is cool. Come over here and I'll give you some food. And we're just going to interact a little bit, and it's going to be a good experience. And I'm going to slide the door shut and you're going to be cool. Rather than I slide it open and it's like trying to catch rockets and then one of them shoots past you. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah. So now they all I've got the one that's in this cage right here down by me. I can get him to walk out onto my arm and take it out of the tongs. And then once he grabs it, and then runs back into the cage, and he goes in the back corner and he eats it and watches me through a crack. And then I'll wiggle another piece of food and he'll come back out and walk back up my arm. Yeah, but and that's the fun part. That's one of the biggest things I love about the monitors, and that's where me and Erica nerd out with the Varanids and the crocodilians is that intelligence and that interaction. Like our crocs are target trained, and they still hate me and they love her, but they're target trained. So at least when they're bigger, I won't die. Hopefully, but the monitors, same thing. Yeah, right. No, I got some of I've gotten animals that were dreams of mine to have that I'd seen in books as kids that I never even saw in person, and I've been able to acquire them, and have them, and then I bring them in, and I'm like, opening this container is like the pinnacle of my life in this hobby, and then I open the container and it hates me, and then my wife picks it up, and then it's like, meow, Mom, you're cool, let's cuddle. I'm like, that's cool. And then I go to the cage, and then our African dwarf crocodile is right behind my desk, and all it does all day is stare at me, and if I look at it, it jumps out and hits the glass. And then she comes over, and he just kind of trots over, and she puts her hand down, and he walks right onto it. And then
you made the bad experiences. You probably had it first, huh?
Yeah, no, but and then I put my hand out, and he came over and looked at my hand and just went, oh, and just bit it. I'm like,
dude, my monitors won't breed.
Platform.
Yeah, my monitors won't breed in front of me, but my lady, she'll walk into the thing and she shows me all the pictures. Like, hey, look what I'm looking at.
Yeah, whatever. I don't care. Screw you. That snake likes me more.
Yeah, my lady's she's more of a keeper than me.
Yeah,
my lady's more of a keeper than me, man.
Oh, absolutely, dude. I get it. But yeah, I mean the diet, all this stuff. That's what makes it fun, and that interaction is what makes it fun for me. And I've been doing that with the baby peacocks that were growing up that we hatched this year. I've been tongue feeding them, and part of that with them was more, and why we're trying to work with our peacocks more is I've had, like, they're all wild caught except for the ones I hatched, and I think I've got a couple other that were captive hatched. But the majority of the ones we have that I have or me and Eric we have here are the wild caught ones. Same with most people, and like they're so shy, and they hide constantly, and they don't come out, and they don't let you see them. If I'm 20 feet away from these cages and they see me, they drop off the log into a bush and they're gone, and that's. It's every time, and I've been able to get like within 10 feet and zoom in with a camera to like see that bump on the stick. Yeah, that bump on the stick that has a point on it is his face. Isn't that a cool lizard? The spike on the stick that you can't identify at all. But like, so I was. But then I was sitting at my desk. I looked over and down here. I've got a big trio of them, and the male was out, and he was like tweaking all over this girl, this female, and I'm like, oh, cool. He's getting all ready for it. It was about time, and I'm like, cool. So I kind of snuck around the corner and peeked, and the female had passed away, and he was just a little necrophiliac and being real creepy. He was all about her, and this was not, and like this wasn't a recent pass away. And I felt bad, but because they're so shy, I have 4 in there. I see them once in a while. I assume they're okay. I can pretty much distinguish which ones they are, but the 2 of the 3 females look identical. So I saw them out all the time, and I'm like, yeah, they're fine. Nothing smelled, nothing was weird. None of them looked bad at any point ever. So there was never a reason I would have thought I needed to go dig one up. And I don't want to mess with them because they've got their pheromones and their territories, and I don't want to screw with it. So when I looked in there, I was just like, I was so mad, and I was so frustrated that we didn't see it. We didn't even know what happened. And
how often do you male swap?
Not too often yet, but that's one of the things I want to do this year. Is I was actually looking at potentially linking all of these cages together and cutting holes through them and just letting them have a free for all and just watch the males to see if they fight. And if they don't and they just get territorial, that's even better. Right. I hope they get pissed off at each other. Just don't kill each other, but be angry. Yeah.
I'm thinking along the same lines.
Some of that makes the whole process go.
Yeah.
You know? I think the females get excited as well. The females know too. Now,
male combat's important, dude, especially for a lot of stuff.
Right now, going back to, do you ever notice your girls just utilize your nesting options? And what are you using for nesting options?
So I've got a bunch of different stuff. I've got I can move and you guys can see it, but in this enclosure, just got a big bin.
Oh, the nest bin?
Yeah, just the nest bin, hole in the side, deep dirt inside, moss, bunch of crap mixed together. And then like for the peacocks, these 2 enclosures just have a little humid hide in it, and that's it. They can use it, but it's also really deep dirt, and there's a lot of stuff all over, so they can kind of utilize anywhere they want. And then this one, it's these 2. They're like that. This one over here has, I took PVC tubes, and I cut a door in them and hinged it and locked it, and then cut a hole and capped the ends. And then treated the outside with a bunch of silicone and sprays and stuff and like dirt and crap. And so I could sink it in. It kind of looks like a hole in a log. And then I kind of put that in the back and I buried them. And I've buried a couple throughout where the hole has like a cork bark down into the ground. And then it's tipped up a little bit where I can just move away some dirt, open up the door, check in it, lock it back up and cover it up again. So I've got those options. The female that laid those eggs laid them outside of that, literally right next to it. She dug down to lay them against it. The same dirt was on the inside. So I'm like, whatever. Found them, but so one other thing I was talking about with Alan earlier was one of the things I'm working on now is because I've got 6 different groups of them, not including the babies, 6 groups of adults. I'm gonna start tweaking a little bit of what we're doing because they're all healthy and they're doing well. I'm cycling them, I see some breeding, and I'm not getting the results I really want. So I want to start tweaking it a little bit. And when I start getting these wild caught animals, I deck them out. I want them to be very, very secure. I want them to be able to hide. I don't care if they're crazy and I never see them. I want them to be like that. I want them to take as much time as they can to recover, fatten up, be able to handle the stress from medications and things like that. I want them to be able to just disappear. And then after it takes about, generally with any wild caught herptile, you're looking at about 3 years in captivity before they really start to just get into the groove of captivity, seeing you, knowing you're not a threat, being more interactive, being out more, just before they start to kind of settle in. And you'll see it earlier than that with some individual animals, but in general, it's usually 2 to 3 years. So I take that 2 to 3 years, even with adult animals. I don't try and breed them. I don't cycle them. I just try and get them medicated, get them clean, get them healthy, get them muscular, get them lean, having some good weight, and making sure that they're interactive and any issues they had are cleared up. And then after that, right now is where I'm hitting that with a couple of the newer groups. So I'm going to start taking out a lot of the dirt and doing a lot thinner layer that they can't burrow in as much either. Because I don't know if you see this with your peacocks. They are super subterranean. Every single one of these enclosures has the most, it's like a rodent lives in there underneath the dirt. There's tunnels everywhere. So they utilize it a lot. And I'm like, I'm never going to find eggs unless I literally dig every one of these enclosures completely up every time. And so
I designate everything.
Right.
So you have so currently I have everything designated, but what I also found helps, right? Everything. All right, picture the ground, right? There's obviously the actual very base of the cage, and then there's the soil amount, but all the items aren't touching the soil at all. Actually, everything is suspended up, like you can use like jungle vine or whatever, or I don't know, some type of brace, right? But most of my hanging stuff is completely suspended, and nothing where it's like I have to rip the bottom and I have to take off this log. It's more so if I wanted to just go, I'll be able to move that, adjust that log a little bit with my hand, because it's currently being hung from the ceiling or a vertical wall, right?
So ease of access.
So the ease of access for me is just to maneuver with my hand, dig in the back very far if I need to without having to rip up stuff. Now, I will have a couple buried logs or designated tubes that are the structural support for the thing, and that's what I'm going to be looking at mostly. But if I just don't have a ton of stuff that maybe more so complicates things for me,
Right.
But it is 4 inches right above that, or 6 inches right above the actual ground level. It's just not touching the ground.
Well, and that's kind of where I'm going with these is I still want dirt down there. I still want to be able to have humidity. I'll probably throw some isopods and crap in there just to deal with the, droppings or whatever. And then the plants that are in there, I like having live plants. And the cool thing is peacocks and like Timorensis are known for sitting out on palm leaves and basking. So that's why I got a bunch of little palms and things like that. But I'm just going to do pots like they usually would be. I know that that's a potential designated area there where they dig, but because that plant's in there and how a pot is, I'm going to know if she dug in it, or she's going to fling dirt off the edge. I'll know she was in it. And then the other one will either be a couple of those tubes in different, avenues, or a box, or some designated area where it's like, it's really secure. And again, like, I wanted it where it wasn't easy to find them at first, but now that I've gotten through that and they're into everything, and now it's like, now I'm comfortable.
I don't want to dig a ton of soil.
Yeah, now I'm comfortable getting you to like, I'm going to tweak the habitat a little bit. Yeah, a lot of these, like the bark and the logs and stuff, are all going to get screwed higher and mounted. Yeah. Same thing. So the bottom will be just for me to put pots and set stuff, and there'll be a little bit of dirt so that it's not just nothing. And then that's going to be one of them. And then another one will maybe have a little bit more dirt, and I'll tweak how I'm putting the plants and things in there, or how close to the lighting it is, or how the things are mounted. So everything will be pretty similar, but I want to tweak one aspect of each one and see if it makes a difference to how they interact with it. And if I'm sure a lot of the tweaks won't make any difference at all, but I'm kind of seeing like, okay, is there something, until I can go to, Roddy Island and find them and watch them, I don't know exactly how they're going to utilize the things that I'm giving them. And that's where I think we kind of are at a lack of, we're at a disadvantage, because we can create the perfect environment. We can copy a picture exactly, but we still aren't seeing exactly how those animals would interact with that wild environment, and how, like, do I need to go, like, would it benefit, for some monitors, it would benefit people to go get giant rotting logs full of bugs and crap and chuck it in their enclosure and let their monitors just go to town on it. Like, that would be great. Like, but these guys probably don't do that. But I bet they hide in a lot of, tree crevices. But what does that look like? Is it vertical? Is it fallen logs? Do they like, an angled branch more? I don't know. And I don't have a way to see that. So that's one thing, like, me and Eric are hoping to do we were hoping actually to do it this year, but COVID. So over the next couple of years, we're actually planning a couple trips to the Solomon Islands to go see the spinulosus, nice. And then hoping to get down to Roddy Island. At some point, I want to get to Sau Island. I want to get to Lesser Sunda. I want to see my Timors in the wild. I want to go, and literally, I just want to go out there for like a week. And me and her are going to walk into the woods with the people we know. We're going to camp, and I'm going to wake up in the morning, sit next to a tree with a camera and a notebook, and we're just going to sit there all day and just watch crap. And just watch what things are doing and how are they interacting and where are the monitors going and coming from when we see them, and like where are we finding them when we do go walk around. Like spinulosus are a great example of just a massive problem with husbandry because, everybody I know keeps them way too hot and cooks them all because we talked about earlier with the heating, they keep them like all monitors, and that's kills them. And then the other thing is they treat them arboreally. Arboreally. And it's the same thing with like mangroves and things like that. Everybody treats them like a tree monitor. And when I talk to people, like, yeah, but you see them in trees and pictures of them in trees all the time. And I'm like, yeah, pictures. Who took that picture? Yeah, well, not even that. Who took the picture? Was it magic, or did a giant naked gorilla show up in the middle of the forest and click a thing at it? Because that big, weird, naked gorilla tromping through the forest scared the piss out of that animal, and it ran up the tree to get away from it. That's why you found it in a tree. You don't know that it was in that tree the whole time. And that was the problem with spinulosus. People were treating them arboreal because that's where they see them in the wild. And when they collect them, they collect a bunch of them from, tree areas and like forested areas. But when you actually look at how they actually utilize their environment, they burrow all of the time. They have to be under something. They never bask out that high unless that's the only place for them. They'll hang on lower branches. They like sitting on a log or a branch off of a log that they can kind of just hang on but drop off if they want. But they're not
the lower the lower level.
Yeah, but they're not going vertical, and they're not sitting on the cork on the sides. They're not hanging on the wall like you see with a lot of especially a lot of Australian species when they're breeding or gravid, they hang. I don't see the hanging at all with these, barely at all. And because they just really don't utilize that space.
Full disclosure, I got my first pair of peacocks. Actually, they were Kai's before I really knew Kai and talking to him. And then they changed hands as far as a friend bringing them, from Kai basically to me. But when I got that girl, she was actually gravid. And I think about a week later, gave 13 great looking eggs.
I really kicked myself in the foot for that one.
Yeah.
Well, to the listeners out there, don't worry, those eggs never made it, so you're not missing out on any peacocks that were floating around. Real quick, I want to touch on this, something I went over with Kai real quick. On this incubator, I was incubating these eggs with one of the Exoterra.
So you either cooled them or cooked them.
Yeah. So, yep. And this recently happened. I saw a post on the Aki Monitor page where someone else had a similar thing.
Sean Harrington, the frog whisperer, does a lot of really amazing lizards. He had one of those that had easily $8,000 to $10,000 worth of eggs in it, and it turned into a refrigerator and killed them all. And this is, again, not a competition thing, not a brand love thing, anything. Literally, when it comes to Exoterra, I love a lot of their products. I don't touch anything that they have that's electronic ever. Their monsoon misting systems had so many electronics and failures and issues. Their incubators are known for failing. They're known for failing. I don't know why. I don't know. They make some incredibly great. If it could function right, it would be incredible. But they just have the worst luck with electronics.
Right. Now, interesting enough, so I think these eggs were about at day 70. I'm turning the corner. I'm excited. 13 great looking eggs in this thing. No duds.
No work.
Yeah, no work. They came to me that way. Yeah. And it was awesome, right? I'm like, yes, getting this peacock project off the ground. And there's a little bit of this is going to work out great, dreams and all that.
Oh, yeah.
I leave one day. I walk in maybe about 12 hours later, and I look at the temp reading, 113. And my heart, Now,
the universe said that you didn't do none of this work.
Yeah, you didn't work
we're gonna
for
take
it.
it back.
You don't deserve these. Dude, being honest, like the ones that I have, people keep asking me about breeding them too. And I'm like, honestly, I've been working with them for years, but I haven't been focused on breeding them at all. The babies that I got were from one of the last imported females that came in, and she came in gravid. So like granted,
what we're gonna do though, what we're gonna do for you guys, we're gonna figure out what you're not doing,
right.
or what you're currently doing, and then just do the opposite. Or do a little, bit different.
Being honest, I've been maintenance feeding them the whole time. I haven't done seasonality with them. I've intentionally not been breeding them, and trying, because again, I was trying to solidify wild caught animals to be more adaptable in the future and be more they'll work better with you when changing their habitats and their environments and their seasons if they're used to their habitat and enclosure. So like it was getting them to that so that I can start to reliably. And that's another thing too. Like as for breeding reptiles, I am the most passive, don't give a crap. If they do it, that's awesome. If they don't, I'm not out anything. I just love that I have them. I love that hatching babies is the coolest freaking thing ever. I don't care what anybody says. But if they don't do it, like they don't do it. As long as they're healthy and they're doing good, I'm cool with it. So
what about the curiosity though?
No, but no, definitely. I've been doing this for like ever. Like, I've never lose that. But it becomes a time management of where's my curiosity got to go. But no, there's always now with some of these monitors, it's become a lot. My collection of animals is, I mean, at one point I was probably around 400 animals, but I was doing a lot of gecko species.
Yeah, that's so many.
Yeah, but like once I had my kid, like I had kids and I had twins. So I went from 2 to 4, and it was like I just didn't have the time to be down there doing it all the time. And then I kind of, in order to back it off, it was like, where do you start, you know? And the first thing I said to myself was, and I kind of got this mentality of, if everything I produce is worth nothing, and I'm just doing it because I love it, and then I give them away because they're not valuable, they're just a thing, what would I keep just because I want to interact with it and I love it? And that's how I went forward, and it's completely changed how I keep animals, how I enjoy it, what I'm doing. I have way less animals, but they're all doing so much better. I'm able to do these things like play with their environments and really just nerd out and question myself and do that kind of stuff.
Keeping the fun in it still.
Yeah, instead of making it a job. Like that's why I also never wanted to like work with reptiles and breed them as a business, is because I don't care how much, like, love your job and you'll never work a day in your life. I don't care who you are. No one loves their job because it's always work and it's always stress. Like, there is no job that I've ever run into that doesn't at least once in a while stress you out because of, like, your check not coming on time or, like, literally anything. So there is no job, there's no stress. But I can make these no stress and just be a hobby and just be fun. You know, like, when things happen, like, it's stressful. When things happen, it sucks. But, like, there's ups and downs.
I guess you got a game plan, though. I think you have, you know, what I mean is, the project that you have going on. I mean, you've been doing what I would say all the footwork and essential, just adapting them and buying as many as you can, and you know, even hatching out the captive hatch ones, which gives you, it's like you know, the universe saying, hey, like, you know, you're almost there.
I know.
Like, we're giving you a little taste. We're giving you a little taste. You're almost there, you know, and just push hard. Because that's what I've been doing with my guys. At first, I thought I was breeding them, but really it was just me getting parthenogenic animals, you know. And then I kept on getting parthenogenic animals, and then I actually found a male, started breeding them, and then, you know, some of the parthos I raised up to now breed. So this is where I'm currently at now. But then, you know, I haven't had like the greatest success where it's like, bam, you just have nonstop success. They breed and then they lay and then you hatch out a bunch. I mean, I've had a lot of small spurts, but you know, I want to definitely take it further, only because, like, okay, sure, most people would consider yourself done when you get to here, you know, like, all right, I'm already done with the project.
I don't know why it's happening yet. I don't totally know why, and that's the problem. That's where we're getting stuck.
This is where we're at.
Yep, I'm about a block behind you, and I just turned the corner of, all right, now we're cycling and we're going into breeding. You're all healthy, you're solid, the foundation's laid. Now we're turning this corner, so this is the year. You're just past that, but it's got to be consistent. And the other piece of it too, like keeping Indo species is kind of like, especially when all your buddies keep Odatria, Aussie stuff, and like water monitors that just crap out eggs because they sneeze. Like it's so annoying because then they're like, dude, you had those things for like 2 years. Why don't you have eggs yet? And I'm like, I don't have the crested geckos of monitors, dude.
Bro.
Yeah, like everybody was like, I'm going to get lace monitors. And I'm like, yeah, cool. You're going to get 20 clutches a year. They're not going to stop ever. You can also get crested geckos, and they're the same. Like, they just cost a lot, and people think they're cool. But they're not hard to keep. They're not hard to breed, and they produce a ton. We're talking about stuff that there's 50 people in the country going, what did you do? I don't know. Like, I don't even know why I have eggs.
I have a couple questions with what you're, going to what you're doing or not doing. We're trying to basically figure out what you're currently doing and then maybe do something slightly different, right? So I had a couple questions, and this is what I did to change from not really just keeping and not really getting successful clutches or whatever came out. Like, these are what happened, right? The female would go through part of the cycle or part of the process and then just not lay. So she'd either reabsorb or do whatever, or the eggs would come out very, very poorly. And then, by poorly, I mean porous, shaped horribly, uncalcified, things like that, dimples, dots, unsmoothness. Basically, they're not looking smooth, right? And so, these are things that I had issues with. And I was going with the normal recommended regimen of using like D3 or using UVB as well, right? And not to use it and then only use it a couple times a week, right? That's what they recommend for most lizards. But I started doing it like every day. And then I started dusting and, just doing things like that much more. And I went with like my current Kimberleys. There was a point where I was raising them mostly on, chicks, ground turkey stuff, grasshoppers, and then I do roaches and crickets here and there. I'll also do like crickets covered in like guts and stuff, but that was just what I was raising them on. But when I went to breed, people were telling me to use insects more, right?
Leaner.
Right. But it wasn't working that well for what I was getting a result of. But then once I switched it up and I started adding the chicks back in, a little bit of mice, not so much. I was also using feeder lizards, and then I also used the grasshopper still. But I was using just insects for a while with just them. So it was like mealworms, roaches, crickets, superworms, and the grasshoppers, and really not using chicks or anything like that as well, or egg or anything. But once I started using that again into my thing, my eggs now are currently coming out great, and the clutches are looking really, really good. And with just in the small time frame from not using UVB and then not really using great calcium supplements and as much as I was, and then also the amount of protein it was compared to the diet that I was using before, which was just insects, because that's what was recommended with me for breeding process, right? And essentially, I didn't want to. What I did is I stopped using mice and chicks because I didn't want to kill my animals, and so they were just recommending use that. So to just use insects. But once I got back into that, my eggs, or like I said, were doing so much better. So maybe I'm not sure what you're feeding currently, but like I think you mentioned, you were just kind of right now they're just being fed once a week, right?
Yeah, they're in kind of a maintenance mode, so then I change it every week. It'll be fish chunks it's whenever I thaw everything for the spinulosis, they get the rest. Like I cut up stuff for them, so they get shrimp, fish, rodents, bugs, a couple different kinds of insects, But I keep it pretty varied. But no, the nutrition's a huge thing. That's a huge miss for reptiles too. And the other piece of it too, me and Erica started talking about this. A lot of people don't realize how many trace minerals and micronutrients are literally laying on the grass outside in our house. Like the Amazon rainforest, the majority of dirt in the Amazon rainforest comes from the savannas of Africa, because it's from dust storms that get carried in the jet stream, and it slowly dusts all of South America. So you can get dirt that you can trace back to Africa all over the rainforest. So if you start to think about how much stuff is in the air from that, dirt, particles of different types of, different types of rocks and dust and sand and, pieces of debris and any materials that literally just anything can be in the air. There's so much more on a blade of grass than you would think. And when we take, these diets and things like that, and we're feeding these animals, we're not thinking about all of that. And while we are looking at some of the macronutrients, all the big things like calcium and phosphorus and proteins and major things that we think about, we are missing a lot of those trace elements. And that's one thing we've been doing with a lot of our stuff is we actually mix our own vitamins now. So I got a mortar and pestle, and I get a bunch of mineral tabs and micro proteins, like all these different random stuff.
Your own, right?
Yeah, and we just kind of grind it all up. We add a bunch of calcium. We take a look. The other thing too is taking a look at the sources of vitamin A that you're feeding. Some of those vitamins, the sources they come from are herbivorous sources. They're vegetable matter. So even though it's a vitamin A molecule, it's a type of molecule that your monitor won't be able to break down because it can't break down that type of vitamin A. So there's multiple types and pathways to vitamin A. You got to make sure you're using the right one. And that happens with a lot of other minerals and stuff too, and nutrients that they need. Is you need to make sure that the type you're giving them is going to be one that they can use. So like beef liver pills are another one that we grind up beef liver pills, which have a ton of nutrition in it too. And we just grind that up into a super fine powder. Yeah, dude, I'll send you guys some of the random stuff we get. But if I go to Walgreens to grab stuff, I'll go through the vitamin section and I'm looking for anything that's a tablet that I can grind up that's got just micronutrients or just some of the compounds that we don't really think of that athletes and things will think of, or really crazy nutritional people will actually analyze that. But for us and our animals, we're so pulled away from that and looking at the diet that we're not thinking that way. And I think for a lot of these monitor species, especially because of how lean they are, I really put monitors in the same class. If we're comparing them to people, they really are the athletes. They're lean, they're quick, they have burst energy, they build metabolism. They need a lot of calories, but they need a lot of lean calories. So I kind of look at them more like you would look at you feeding them more like you would do for training someone, rather than just feeding them for like you would your dog, because if you don't feed your dog, they die. Like it's different. So some of that stuff I think has made some differences in our animals' ability, especially to rebound during that first couple of years and really solidify a lot of their organs and stuff too. Because you really got to care about. It's one thing that, because all those import animals are incredibly dehydrated and they have a lot of renal issues, and you need to give them those vitamins and minerals that they need to help their liver and kidneys and their renal system bounce back. So
kind of to go back a little bit, as I'm about where you are as far as the peacocks, the Timors, the Similis, and there's a group of blue trees. I think I'm right in the same area with all of those, where I'm missing something. Obviously, they haven't been producing, but the focus was on, first off, a large portion of those were actually small animals. They came in as babies, raising those up, seeing what they would eat, and I was always trying to keep that, it's still stuck in my head as far as that ideal jungle, humidity and always jungle type of environment. But my focus wasn't necessarily that I was going after that. It was just trying to give them something so I could reach, homeostasis per se.
Right.
Just make sure they're thriving and doing good. But to go back to some of this is just, I think I'm at that point now where, okay, it's time to start tweaking the things. Maybe throwing in seasons, maybe
what you can and can't handle.
Yeah, give it a try.
Well, and
dry season, a wet season.
Push them to the limit just a little bit. Yeah,
well, and with Indo, honestly, if you start looking into a lot of the Indo stuff, I actually started taking a lot of my advice on some other snakes that I like. Garrett Hartle has got dwarf retics down. And some of these animals, some of these localities of dwarf retic, they basically live on a mangrove swamp in the middle of the ocean. And then when the tide goes down, there's land for like 12 hours. And then the tide comes back in and it's a mangrove swamp underwater. So these animals don't they don't have like just free range to go eat and do whatever they want. So he really nailed in what their cycle is. And when you start looking at the seasonal, that kills me. You look at the Solomon Islands and look at their seasonal variation, and they're like, the rainy season is January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. Not September, because there's 3 less inches out of the 9 feet.
Yeah.
And then the other ones are, you know what I mean? Like, it's not really a dry, wet season. You see some variant, but it's not a lot. And then the temperature is the same thing. It's like at night it's 78, and during the day it's 85, and then it does this sometimes.
So what Danny Gorman, I think, I'm not sure if many of you guys know this. He's the gentleman behind Albino Salvatore. He's currently I believe he's in Indonesia, and he bred like T negative back to T negatives and T positives. He's gotten some like paradox looking thing with a bunch of spots on it, and he does really great work with Salvatores. Now, I was asking him just like about how the seasonal is, and just personally, as an American, he can translate so much better than me.
For sure.
Really dissect anything, and he's there, and he's typically pretty good with sharing, and so I really just was starting asking him about some pictures that he was sharing, and I was asking about surface temperatures and things like that, and it basically led to a conversation about the seasons, right? And during their dry period, it's really just they get their coldest nights during that period, and it's just less cloudy. That's it.
Yeah.
The cloud allows things to escape more, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, the sunniness, it dries it all out quick.
Right,
it
exactly.
Still rains almost the same amount. It just dries faster.
Yeah, it's just no clouds during that time, and that's all he said. He's like, it's a little bit cooler because the clouds aren't trapping in all the heat, and when it's rainy, it's basically just cloudy all the time. And I've really taken that into, all right, they do have something different. It isn't just humid there all the time because it's on the equator, and it isn't. And so at first, that's what I used to think. All right, I'm gonna have a dense cage full of plants and all decked out, spray it all the time, keep it alive and lush. My animals loved it when it looked like fall, They love it when it looks like fall. It's just things are dry, brittle.
Like they're out more now that all their plants got dried out and died. And I'm looking at these and I'm like, God, dude, I've got to go back to Home Depot, buy 20 of these freaking palm trees. This is such crap. And they're like, nah, we're good with this like crispy leaf. But like that's where me and Garrett got into the conversation of like seasonality, and he's like, it's not temperature humidity like it is in a lot of other places like Australia and stuff that people are focusing on. It's seasonal food, and it's migrations through those areas. And like when you're talking about the rainy season and they're coming into the rainy season and that's when they start getting all pumped up, that's because all the frogs are going to start breeding and they're going to start having a ton of frogs in food. And then that's what kicks them into their cycle, because they're like, look, we know it's about to be a walking buffet out here. Time to start getting ready and cycling to get ready to absorb that food. Like with the dwarf retics, that's what Garrett does all year. It's one food item a month, just maintenance feeding, and then when he's ready to cycle them, he pounds them with something that looks like they shouldn't be able to eat it, and that he gives them some stupidly huge piece of food, and then that kicks their body into, I've got resources, it's time to start cycling. And then then as soon as they're done digesting it, it's like right in with the males, and boom, and he's got it. People have been trying to breed some of those dwarf localities for 15 years, and he's got it down to a science where he's just knocking it out. But that's where that thing was. So that's kind of why, like when you said the same thing about feeding cycles, Indo is different. It's not a seasonality weather-wise. It's a seasonality food availability-wise.
Oh, man, it's crazy, man. I love the difference in that area. All of those are just it's like a wrench in every. I don't know how to say it right. It's just like
everything's working a little different.
It's just a whole.
They've developed, especially little islands. It's like this one's a little different. This one's a little different. Well, this one's got more of a mainland, and there's things that adapt in the middle of the mainland, and then there's things along the coast, and
Dude, we could get into a whole like this will have to be another episode where you get me on my other soapbox, and that would be microclimates and understanding where your animals actually spend their time. So like I want to reinvent how we look at animal care and husbandry. Instead of starting with this picture of Africa and going, oh, and they need a little humid hide because they go in a burrow sometimes, but the rest of it looks like a savanna where they never are. Why would you do that? How about instead we focus on a really, really incredible den that you can see, and then the outside little tiny chunk over here is where they can get out and bask if they want to. But the den is a perfect environment, and that is where we look at them and start building it from like, okay, if they spend 90% of their time in a hole in the ground, why is 4% of their enclosure a hole in the ground? Like, and that's where all the husbandry mistakes come in, because now it's too dry for the animal. Well, this animal lives in Iraq. It's obviously dry, but it's not underneath that rock where it spends 23 hours a day. So that's the problem with Odatria. That's actually why me and Erica got rid of all of our Australian dwarfs. I want to say we got a dozen adult Kingorum over a couple of years, and every single one of them died from renal issues, gout, dehydration, every single one of them. And even animals like Primordius that came from well-known breeders who really know their stuff with Odatria, I was getting them with like in just same rough shape. And it's because everybody goes, they live on these hot rocks. Same thing. Kimberly, same thing. Like all their Kimberleys weirdly aren't as
Kimberleys.
Yeah, but
mine love it cooler. Like I'll have it blistering, and I used to have it blistering like 140, right? Like, okay, screw it, let's just do it.
If you do it at a spot this big, they'll love it, but the rest of the enclosure can't be that hot.
Right, and they don't want it that hot. They actually prefer it not to be. And I started doing like so I have the basking area, and then I have slanted hung platforms that they can either bask on or hide behind, and then hide behind another platform that's like that, right? And so they would always just be there. And then I was just like, all right, I'm gonna turn this other bulb off real quick and just see if 120, 115 is what they like right now. And man, they do so much more. Just because I don't think they're, it's when it's 140, they're just like, man, it's so hot, I can't have sex. I can't do anything. I don't want to do anything.
Well, the other thing too, think about it this way. This is where the problem is with husbandry of a lot of animals. So, okay, they live on the rocky outcrops out in the desert in Australia. That's cool. If we take a picture of that and you're not there and you're just looking at an image, you're looking at dry desert, no lush, nothing, and a big rock, and you're assuming it's like it would be anywhere that you've seen or seen videos of where it's dry, bone dry, it's horrible. And it is to an extent. However, some of those giant rocks have crack. They don't live on the surface. The surface of some of those rocks breaks 200 Fahrenheit. Like, you can actually boil water on those rocks they live in. They don't live on them because they'd be dead. Where they live is in these crevices that go into these rocks down into the ground, where it's 55, 60 degrees down there and 99% humidity from the water seeping down into the rock during the rainy season. Like, that's Kingorum are another one that get, like, that's the one that I saw the most issues with, and they're the biggest crevice-dwelling insectivore, period. Turkey diets with them is a horrible idea. Like, you can't. They're insectivores. The reason they have such a long tail is actually what they do. This is one of the reasons I love Kingorum. They walk into a crevice, and then they open their mouth, and they take their tail, and they poke it through the crevice and chase any bugs into their mouth with their tail. Like, they eat like spiders that are back in these crevices, and they use their tail to poke them out of the crack and chase them into their mouth. Like,
interesting.
Yeah, but like, they live in this teeny little crack in this huge red rock. But it's not like that, and we got to look at those kind of things and develop some of the habitats based around their microclimate.
The little micro habitat as well. Yeah,
I started telling people, if you're going to keep Australian Odatria, keep them like you think you should be keeping Indo species, like humid and cooler.
For I guess for the people that are beginning and they're listening to this and they kind of we're talking as we've been basically back and forth trying to figure out what it's like captivity, taking instances or ideas from the wild, trying to apply it, back and forth, right? But for what we're trying to explain here, you can't just keep them blistering hot and not have substantial humidity to back it up.
Exactly.
You just can't. You just can't have them bone dry or enclosure that is essentially nothing to have substantial humidity or an escape route or or to go revamp and, either cool off or get humid again, right? Those enclosures, for me, that's what I learned is I used to think that the Kimberleys needed to be blistering hot. And then at the same time, I only had a little nest bin. So the rest of the enclosure was dry. And then I started having issues and they weren't really reproducing well or things like that. And then once I kind of cooled it down, and then I started adding different ways to heat the soil. Because at one point I was just, having really thin amounts of sand or soil at the very base, and it was dry with leaf litter, and that's it. But I would think, all right, the nest bin is enough to go to, but it wasn't really saturating the air in the enclosure, right? And so that's what I'm doing now. Is I actually have full-on nesting ability and a foot of sandy, moist soil in the enclosure as well as the nest bin. And so this has been able to keep them, I think, supported a little better rather than being just so bone dry.
Oh, right. And you see better action out of them, too. Like, you can soak a monitor every day and let it have a bath every day. And if you put it back into an enclosure that's that dry, it absorbs it out. You literally take the humidity out of their body just from them breathing. Because when they breathe out humidity like we do. If you breathe against a window, it makes fog. If you put yourself into an area where there's zero humidity or it's 10 or 20%, it's literally desiccant dry, which is what a lot of those enclosures turn into. Then
basking?
Breathing is dehydrating them. And you end up with renal issues and liver issues and what ends up looking like metabolic bone disease, or they don't hold weight or their weight's weird. I see a lot of Indonesian monitors and monitors in general where it's a big chunky female, but her hips are tiny, her tail's tiny, and her legs are scrawny. Yeah. It doesn't make sense, but that's
I've seen
part
that
of it.
Look
all the time. And it's that, and then it's the idea of like for enclosure size. I mean, obviously, not everybody needs to give their animal a room, but with monitors, like you said earlier, you got to go bigger. It's not good enough to just be like, they got enough room to move around and walk back and forth, and they'll do good. Like, and you could have some luck. I know of some very prominent Salvatore breeders that basically have 3 1.2 monitors in a tiny closet that barely they can move, and they produce a ton. At the same time, if I lock you and 2 chicks in a closet and I never let you out, at some point you're going to start throwing babies at me because you're going to have nothing else to do. And that's why everyone in the Midwest is born in October, September, and August, because there's nothing to do in January, February, and March when it's -20. So like
the COVID boom is coming.
Dude, this is just the Midwest winter boom. It's me, all of my kids, my wife, all of us are born between August and November. There's a reason. Like but that's the same thing. So you can't count. I don't count that success. And when you look at the animal and the animal's health, or when you talk to these guys and they're like, yeah, my breeder, I lost a couple breeders last year. They were like 8 years old. They've been producing tons of clutches. They just, they got old. And I'm like, yeah, it sucks when that animal that lives to be 40 dies at 8 of old age, because that happens. Yeah. So, there's tons of things we need to look at like that. And I think it really just comes down to paying more attention and understanding more about the animal's needs than what your idea is that you got from looking at a picture on the internet. Right. And that's one thing that, like I said, me and Eric are pushing ourselves once COVID's over too, is once a year we want to travel to one of the places that house the majority of these animals we work with. I want to go see what is the dirt like. What does the air feel like? What is the difference in temperature between my eyesight level and my ankles? Because in the rainforest here, it's 95 degrees and 100% humidity. And by my ankles, it's 72 and 80% humidity. Like that, how do people not understand that? Like dart frogs, dart frogs can't get over 80 degrees, but they live in the 95 degree rainforest.
Right.
Where do they live?
I was down in Akumal, down in where is that? Is that still Mexico?
Yeah,
it might be on.
I think so.
Near the Yucatan. And basically, we were staying on the coast. It was right on the coast. It was a house, and come nightfall, if you were on the one side of the house that faced the coast and you got that breeze that came in, it was perfect. You could fall asleep just like that. If you were on the other side of the house that didn't have any windows facing that area, the air just hung there, and you would sit there just sweating. You know? And that's just a house. So you got to imagine what these animals are feeling, what they're capable of doing, and where they can get to based on their needs.
And just the differences in the environment. Like that environment has way more than just 2 options for the side of the house. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many levels and crevices, and even stuff like in Florida, when I'm down in Orlando, I collect a whole bunch of like invasive millipedes because we go out and that's what me and the kids do. We go pick up millipedes. You'll dig into this freezing cold dirt, or maybe it's not freezing cold, but at night, say it's like 60-degree dirt, and I'm moving this dirt around, and what I do is I feel for warmth, because the millipedes will get into an area where they start digesting and eating all that, the leaf litter, and they create a little pocket of heat like you get if you were composting something. So if you feel for the warmth and the cold and you pull that apart, you'll just have a pile of them. But that's, you'd never know that existed, or that they were able to create a 15-degree, 20-degree warmer temperature by composting. But that's how animals incubate their eggs in the wild. Like, they don't have they don't have a machine they put them in that keeps everything perfect. Like, but they're able to do that. Like, right? Like, yeah, you know, you just get your monitor, you watch them go into the store and you crap in the incubator, and then they come out and we help them out. But like, so it's totally different. But like, there's so many pieces they can go and find that. Like, talking about Brandon Shiflett, he did a post about finding ackee eggs, and he took a temp gun. He's like, they lay them at 86 degrees. So I think she was digging around here. So he starts temping. He's like, okay, that's 80 in the right area. So he digs there, and he just kind of temps, and then he digs and keeps following 86, and boop, there's the eggs.
That's exactly what I do too.
Yep.
I actually have it. I know it's designated in my nest bins, and so I'll have a slightly warmer side, but then I'll have the side that gets down to 80, even a side that gets to like 78, 79. And they'll lay within the range of between the range of 81 and like 85-ish.
Yeah, like they know. They feel it, and they know. Like,
yeah.
Dude, if I'm not a thermometer, I'm an idiot. Like, and they just are like, yeah, I'll put my eggs in. That's cool. Like,
I'm doing things the wrong way.
Right?
For me, I've learned to develop a sense where my fingertips tell by feeling the texture of the soil.
Yeah,
if you
that
can,
makes sense.
you basically feel for the looseness or the burrows, tunnels that lead to it, and then you can kind of just tap it and it'll indent and fall in, and then kind of lean towards going that direction. But sometimes they've steered me wrong and made like a whole U-turn.
Isn't that fun? Isn't that awesome when you're digging through an entire enclosure and you're touching? Because I do the same thing with a lot. Like when I had like Tristis, I was doing that. 12 inches of substrate at the bottom, and she goes in the back corner, and I'm like, crap. So you go down, you start pulling it apart, and you feel where it's soft and where it's hard. And that's why like most of my enclosures, like when I redo them or do anything, I pack the crap out of it. So knowing it would just keep settling and be tight, so that when I went in there, I could do that. I could push against it and kind of feel, all right, it's kind of loose here. You can kind of follow it around, and then you make it all the way around back to the other side, and you're like, oh nope, there's the entrance. There's my fingers. Crap, let's go find. I missed something, and you're feeling the walls. And you're like, that's kind of squishy. And eventually, you just get pissed off and start turning all of the dirt because you're like, she didn't even lay yet. I know it, or she ate them. Like she's just being a crank. She's just screwing with me. Right. Yeah.
So
I then you get frustrated.
Today.
Well, then you get super frustrated, and you're just moving it, and then you flip an egg, and you're like, gotcha, that's where they were, crap. Like, yep.
I've done that. Well, all right, guys, and we are getting a little long now. I don't know if that first part we still have it. Hopefully we do.
We'll have to look at it all.
Yeah, so hopefully we could splice it all together. If so, I think we're about 2.5. We're going.
That's a long one, man.
Right? Yeah. So
that's good.
Yeah.
No, we really appreciate you coming on. I mean, we're able to really get into details that I think just most people need to develop a sixth sense for.
Absolutely.
I understand. Shoot, I can tell a beginner all day, hey, you need to like look at, extent details of temperature and where these animals are from. I'd love to really tell them that, but not everybody's really gonna really take to you telling them that, for one, because that's gonna. I'm not sure with some people it's just like, hey, maybe they're just the way of their learning and grasp on knowledge is super simple, because these animals, the people are really worried about the animals, right? They're not really trying to worry about like the whole ecosystem that they need to apply, which does really benefit the whole animals everything, right? It all just kind of flows together. But most people are really just worried about like heat them and feed them type deal, you know.
Yep.
But yeah, I really I'm really hoping that people can really take from this is, man, we've kind of been doing it for a little while, so it is kind of just second nature to us. We'll hope like you guys are thinking about these really small. They make they're subtle details, but they make up.
Oh yeah, it's a big difference.
We're talking about, you know, yeah. So, you know, when he's talking about microclimate and microhabitats, it's like an example their escape route and where they're going to pocket up and hide for a while, things like that, and they'll have multiples of those where maybe one's in a tree and another one's in the ground and things like that. Those are those escape routes where they'll go to, and like I was mentioning in a previous podcast, you know, they really utilize more than we think about. We're only looking at the soil and up, but what about the soil and down? You know, and you know, I'm really glad on a lot of things you're able to point out for some people to really grasp on, because, you know, thinking in depthly like that is, I really appreciate you for pointing some of those things out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's I've been keeping animals for so long and dealing with reptiles for a long time, and you know, my whole goal with everything that I do is I want to take the knowledge that we have from this amount of time and try and embed that knowledge into products and information for people without having to spell out the 20 years of mistakes and learnings that I've had or things that I've done. Like, how do you, I can't give you all my experience, but what I can tell you is, and like you said, you can tell people whatever you want, but if they don't want to hear it, it's not going to do anything. So
yeah,
I've kind of gotten to a point where I just don't want to, I'm done playing the game of, if we work harder to educate people, the hobby will get better, because it won't, because nobody listens. And the other part of that is people coming into like a pet store. When you go to like a Petco or PetSmart or local pet store or whatever, if they go in and they get a dog, everything you need for a dog is there, and the knowledge is there, and it's easy. So they come in with that same idea. They don't understand the difference in reptiles or husbandry, and they don't even understand that there is a difference. They come in with that same idea of, I buy a kit, I have all the stuff I need right here, so it's just as simple as a dog or anything else, and they don't understand that. And there's no way for us to get to a person who walks into one of those stores to get their first pet and get them to understand the amount of knowledge they really need to be really successful. But what we can do, or what in my position, what I've been trying to do is integrate that knowledge into the products without them ever having to know why it works or how it works. They just need to know that they need it and it works. Or it comes in the kit that they need and it's going to do something, like having a human hide in a leopard gecko kit. They don't need to know why they need it. They just need to have it, and they need to put it together based on the instructions, and they'll be more successful because of that. And that's where we need to get to, is creating things that allow people to be successful without needing to know why they were successful. Just long enough to get to the point where they start to learn about reptile shows, or they start to buy their first book or dig into reptiles a little more. And then they get that itch for knowledge and learn how much better they can do. Because we all hit that point where we're like, the doors opened and you're like, oh my God, look at how much more there is. But when you first got your first reptile, nobody was like that. You're like, this is my cool little gecko, and he's kind of neat. And you didn't know that. I didn't know shows existed. I didn't know there was a hobby. I just thought you just bought it like a pet, and you like, I have my dog and I have my lizard and whatever. But there's more to it than that. And I think that's where we're going to be successful moving forward, is giving some of these people that opportunity to understand they're going to fail, and then try and give them the best information we can. And then going forward, set them up with the products and the things we need that have that knowledge that we have built into it.
Now, Ryan, you say you're tired of it, but you're actually in reality sitting here with us,
doing more than anything. Yeah.
Dude,
you know what's crazy? Okay, like
I don't think my whole life has been, there's no reason to have this much knowledge on something if I can't share it. And you know, that's how I am.
I say all the time, like, you know, I think it's just a common joke, like, you know, F people and I just can't deal with people and stuff like that, right? To be honest, I love people.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, sure, people. It's all about that, I guess. At the end of the day, like, I'm trying to help these people out, and then they help their animals out, and you know, a person like me, I used to be, you know, kind of secluded in the background. I do my own thing, and now it's like, all right, sure, I'm kind of like a face to some of this stuff now, and I'd like to at least, you know, just be able to utilize what I'm doing and give back, right? And I didn't think I'd have like a YouTube and podcast and being able to reach people regularly back and forth. But man, I find myself like in the front, like doing all of this stuff, and it's different. Like I would expect, man, I'd just be burnt out, right? Because you've been doing this for so many years.
Yeah,
but
it's all about where your passion is. It's all about where your passion is.
I find myself here.
I almost find my passion is more in getting other people excited about reptiles than it is about the reptiles themselves.
Yeah, so when people get it, when it clicks for them,
it's the coolest thing ever when you're talking to them and they get it and they get excited and they start nerding out with you. Like that's why I love coming onto stuff with this. I can just nerd out with you guys about microclimates and UV wavelengths and that kind of stuff versus like I'm not giving up on people at all. It was more about I'm giving up on the idea that we can educate them to be good keepers right away. That's just not how it's going to work, and I'm sick of thinking that's a thing. I'm never going to give up on educating people. Like anybody wants to have me for a talk or anything, I'll talk to anybody, anywhere, anytime if I think I'm getting some knowledge out there, because that's the only way that the hobby is going to improve. And I need it to be around for my kids, and I need it to be around for the future. And there's so much positive to it. We just need to get people to see that and enjoy it and do it right. And herpetoculture is still the Wild West. We don't think it is. And we freak out about the laws and all the stuff going on, but we don't know how to really take care of a ton of stuff. There's an enormous amount of knowledge we just don't have. And and modern herpetoculture, the UV bulb was invented and marketed in 1993 by ZoomEd. That wasn't even, it wasn't even 30 years ago. The active modern hobby is less than 30 years old. Like, that you have to understand that. Like, it's young. And the faster that we can grow and get forward and get our husbandry better and our technologies better and our care better, our best management practices, all of it, everything that we can get better faster, the quicker that we'll get out of this being the target for everybody.
Right. You know, you touch on something real important there, and maybe we can wrap up a little bit on that. Is just, I love that this is a platform that we can do this kind of stuff, where we can talk to each other and have a free conversation, because we're all in this trying to do the same thing. We're trying to have that success, to see those little faces pop out of eggs and then share that and get the excitement into those other people out there. But unfortunately, on other platforms where it's just, you know, a Facebook page, somebody might be in Camp Ryan or the other half in Camp Allen, and then you got Camp Kai. And the fact is, we could all call each other on the phone and have a conversation.
Exactly.
Sometimes people get divisive over, hey, and we're just here to share these ideas.
That was like the UVB UV index thing. There's two camps on that. They're both right and they're both wrong. And together, they're both right.
What can we learn?
Yeah. So there's plenty of that. You know?
So coming together, even if like you may not agree exactly with someone else, the way they're doing with stuff, and then you're doing something else, you know, it's good to be able to know there's other options to possible ways to think, you know, and it's kind of like I kind of say it all the time. There's many ways to skin this cat or something like that, you know. It's where it's being done, and we just want to now trying to see what else we can add to this. What we can do a little bit more, because there's still a little bit more work to be done a bit. But
like if you had a success, I want to know how you got there, and then I want to know like, okay, now where are you going? I'm going to try something a little different. We'll keep talking. Let's get to the same point where we know there's success, and now let's veer off and see who has more success trying something different, and we'll just keep doing that and adding to the knowledge of successful things until we build the recipe for doing it.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's like having a mental state where this is how you're supposed to think, and it isn't one way. It's free thinking.
Try everything. Run with the things that work.
Right,
and things that work for you might not work for me, but it might work for me totally different, and there's no reason for it. But just keep exploring those things, you know.
Yeah, that's the best way. Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate you for coming on and sharing
topics
guys with us and everything.
We'll have you on again soon if you're up for it, Ryan.
Dude, I'm always, like I said, anytime I can get on and anybody and hang out and just talk and share information and pick each other's brains and add to the cloud of knowledge that's out there and what we're doing. Like, that's the point. That's why I do this. This is why I love it. Like, I don't read scientific articles because it's super fun. I mean, I think it's fun because I'm a nerd. But like, I want to know that stuff so I can incorporate it into what I do. And if I have successes, if I get all these peacocks breeding on a schedule, you're going to know how I'm doing it. And everyone that has a pair is going to know how I'm doing it. Like, but that's the point. I want them to be out there more, not just so I can be the guy. Like, that's never been a thing for me. It's weird. People think I'm a big deal. I'm still this nerdy little kid that thinks toads are cool. Like, I don't care. I just want everybody else to be successful and have fun. And rising tides raise all ships. That's what it's supposed to be about. And that's what the hobby needs to be about. Not who has the coolest morph and breeds the coolest thing and is on YouTube the most. It's who's really making the hobby forward.
I've seen a guy, and I used to kind of look up to him too, and he used to be a great water monitor breeder. But man, it just don't let it go to your head, man. You're just doing little lizards. You're doing awesome stuff, but it's all about how you go about helping the next guy come up too. And this guy, right. Well, what I'm trying to say is, you may be doing awesome stuff, and some people are like, oh, I can't tell nobody else because they're gonna take my thunder away, or they're gonna take my source of income. I mean, man, I understand that's how some people think because it is a source of income for them and that's their bulk income or something like that. But there's a lot of little lizards and people that are essentially suffering, confused because you couldn't share. Yeah, you couldn't really break knowledge and help them out. And you decided to take your ego and all that stuff into like you just let it, kind of unleash itself where, you're kind of just pushing everybody away that you may be able to help. There's going to be people that are literally lined on my messages, trying to message me about mangrove monitors and how I'm doing this and that with them. And they have other species that are very similar that they're trying to crack themselves and unlock themselves. And I may be holding this torch, right? But I'm not going to hold this thing forever.
Right. Somebody's going to use what, and on top of that, somebody's going to use what you didn't figure out, something you didn't think of. Yes. And and that's, dude, we're all just going to keep doing this until we get the formulas down. Then we'll just write a book and tell everybody, like, look, it's not hard. Just don't be an idiot. And, stop trying to put a broad brush stroke of husbandry across everything because you want it to be easy.
Yeah. I mean, they are monitors, but they're all a little bit different. That's why it's like that, And
that's what makes it cool.
Right. Mm-hmm. All right, man. So we ready to wrap up now again?
Yeah. Better be, dude. There's a burrito right there with my name on it.
There's a whole great thing going on. No, all right. It was great.
Yeah, it was good stuff. Ryan, thanks for coming on. Again, everybody that's listening, thank you for being with us so far. Hopefully we'll be able to keep bringing you more content, more people. We can share these experiences just like we've been talking about. In the meantime, please go and check out MoreliaPythonRadio.com. Sign up for their Patreon so we can help get some more content out to you on different platforms. I'm sorry, not different platforms, but different podcasts. And check out everything they got available to you already. I'm going to wrap it up here just because we've been going so long. So, again, guys, thanks and have a good one.
Have a good one.
Take care, guys.
See you later, man. Thank you.
Later, guys.